Office. Not worried. Duke shook his head. The film hadn't even been released yet, but it had already turned a profit through merchandise and sponsorships. I just want to know as soon as possible how much the midnight screenings can make. Since he chose to take on this series, he naturally wanted to leave something behind in film history. It was no exaggeration to say that, at this stage of his career, with his current wealth, position, and stable relationship, what Duke sought most was to carve a bold and enduring mark on cinema's timeline. Of course, this mark had nothing to do with Oscars or artistic prestige. What he wanted was an achievement like that of James Cameron. Surpassing James Cameron's record-breaking single-film box office total was no easy task. Duke knew that very well. Otherwise, he wouldn't be waiting here now. As he had grown older, his mindset had become calmer. For his recent films, he had always gone to sleep instead of waiting for results. But Star Wars: The Force Awakens was an exception. Scarlett turned her head, glancing at the clock through the window, and gently tugged at Duke's arm. It'll still be a while before the box office numbers come out. You've got a lot of media interviews tomorrow. Let's get some sleep. Unlike his previous few films, since completing post-production, Duke had devoted 100% of his energy to the promotion and marketing of Star Wars: The Force Awakens. Starting tomorrow, a long list of appearances and interviews awaited him. All right, let's go back and rest. Picking up the glass, Duke finished the warm water, stood up first, then helped Scarlett Johansson to her feet. Arm in arm, they walked back toward the bedroom together. Don't worry, dear, Scarlett said deliberately. By the time you wake up tomorrow morning, the report will already be on your nightstand. Chapter 926. Ray's Identity. Chapter 926. Chapter 926. Ray's Identity. Darling, you're awake? Just as Duke opened his eyes, he heard Scarlett Johansson's voice. She was sitting at the dressing table, tidying her wavy golden hair. Turning her head to glance at him, she set down the horn comb and picked up a document lying beside her. Scarlett motioned toward Duke and said, "Tina brought over the latest report early this morning." Oh, Duke immediately became alert. "Just read it to me. It's an astonishing number, darling, so be prepared." After teasing him slightly, Scarlett's eyes turned back to the report. She looked at the number once more before saying, "According to preliminary statistics, the midnight box office for Star Wars: The Force Awakens has reached $72 million. That figure was indeed remarkable. Duke couldn't help but nod slightly. Such a high midnight box office not only broke the record held for years by Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2, but also meant that Star Wars: The Force Awakens had achieved the most perfect of openings. Yet Scarlett Johansson didn't stop there. She continued, "Currently, the film's CinemaScore audience approval rating is as high as 96%, with an average grade of A+. On IMDb, 28,775 users have rated it 9.8 points. The audience's popcorn index of likability is 97%, and on Metacritic, 77 media outlets have given it a combined score of 92. After finishing, she set the report aside, glanced at the clock on the wall, and reminded Duke, "Hurry and get ready. You still have an instant share live interview after breakfast." "I know." Duke jumped out of bed and went into the washroom. 10 minutes later, he and Scarlett Johansson appeared in the dining room together. Just as they sat down, the butler Emma had the maids serve breakfast and, according to Duke's habit, brought him the latest newspapers. Whether entertainment or not, Star Wars: The Force Awakens occupied a very prominent place. The Los Angeles Times even placed its report about the film on the front page headline. "Even if you're not a Star Wars fan, you'll fall in love with this movie." That was the bold and eye-catching headline of the Los Angeles Times Review. Star Wars: The Force Awakens carries expectations unlike any other. It is the long-awaited return after 10 years since 2004's Star Wars: Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, and the first film Duke Rosenberg has released after acquiring George Lucas's company for more than $4 billion. More importantly, the film reunites the original stars, Mark Hamill, Carrie Fisher, and Harrison Ford. With all those expectations, fans demanded even more. But The Force Awakens didn't disappoint. Director Duke Rosenberg perfectly interpreted the core philosophy of the Star Wars series, presenting its familiar elements in their purest and most authentic form. Combining advanced visual effects, Joseph Campbell-style mythological storytelling, and the 1940s notion of heroism, the Star Wars saga, especially the original trilogy, has influenced generations of fans across every profession. When we think of the Force, the connection between light and darkness naturally arises in our minds. The film doesn't preach any religious ideology, yet it allows us to feel its greatness. For The Force Awakens, Duke Rosenberg and his team absorbed all of these strengths and fused them into a new narrative background. The result is a film filled with emotion, humor, and reflection, capable of astonishing both diehard Star Wars fans and newcomers alike. Duke Rosenberg and The Force Awakens prompt audiences to revisit an age-old question: nature versus nurture. This biological and sociological concept is vividly portrayed in the film. No matter what your background, whether stormtrooper or orphan, you have the right to choose your own path. As a film itself, The Force Awakens is highly entertaining, with plenty of moments that make one's hair stand on end. The performances are dynamic and genuine. Oscar Isaac and Daniel Wu both bring versatility and a touch of roguish charm to their roles at just the right moments, while Daisy Ridley has created yet another classic strong female protagonist for the big screen. The scenes with Harrison Ford and Carrie Fisher together evoke memories of their past romance. Although the film runs for 2 hours and 15 minutes, its fast pace and tight storytelling hold the audience's excitement throughout, never once feeling drawn out. It must be said that Duke Rosenberg, through an artistic approach, has seamlessly blended the series' old themes and character traits into a brand new setting. Even viewers unfamiliar with the Star Wars series will enjoy this film. But if you are a fan, you'll appreciate its depth and understand even more how successful it truly is. As a media outlet friendly to Duke, and with Lucasfilm's strong PR efforts, the Los Angeles Times was undoubtedly the most enthusiastic of all print publications in promoting Star Wars: The Force Awakens. After briefly skimming through the newspaper, Duke finished his breakfast and sat in front of his computer right on schedule, preparing for the live online interview via Instant Share. This interview would be broadcast through online sharing, appearing as a featured entry on every Instant Share user's interface. When the interview began, Duke glanced at the display showing the number of viewers tuned in: 3.78 million. The interview itself was one aspect. The greater purpose was to attract fans and casual audiences alike through its post-broadcast influence. After a brief greeting, the first question appeared on Duke's screen. You left the film with an open ending, or rather, a major mystery. What was your thought process during production? Seeing the question, Duke thought for a moment, then quickly typed his response. I think what makes Star Wars so fascinating is its endless possibilities. In the first Star Wars, many mysteries were introduced right from the beginning, and many questions remained unresolved by the end. That's what allowed it to evolve into a trilogy that captivated people. We're using the same method for this new trilogy. I believe as the story progresses, audiences will gain a deeper understanding of the overarching narrative. The interviewer continued, many fans are curious about the relationship between Rey and Finn. In this episode, they seem more like friends, with no romantic subplot. Is there a chance they might become a couple? Duke directly denied it. I think one of the film's main themes is friendship. In many movies, when there's a man and a woman, people assume romance must be involved. The fun of Star Wars, however, is that it's not confined to love stories. It's about loyalty, about finding and building family. In this film, romance isn't particularly important. What matters more is mutual respect and care for one another, rather than a simple love relationship. There's a very funny scene where BB-8 goes down the stairs. How did you shoot that? How did we shoot it? Duke knew the interviewer was asking about BB-8's brief but memorable appearance. He quickly typed out his response. If you've seen the behind-the-scenes footage, that scene was actually operated by our puppeteer, Brian, who wore a green motion capture suit and controlled BB-8 from behind. This puppeteer is incredibly skilled and extremely dedicated. Sometimes, watching him, you could see how he infused his own personality into the character. Removing him from the footage always made me feel a bit guilty because he worked so hard in every single scene, but every time, we still had to erase him from the shot. The two continued their Q&A, discussing many behind-the-scenes details about the film, before moving on to the main topic that had been agreed upon in advance. This was also the question that countless fans had been asking online since yesterday, and it was the most eye-catching part of the interview. From the film, it's clear that Rey has an extraordinary background. Can you talk a bit about her origins? Before answering, Duke glanced at the number of viewers. It had already risen to nearly 5 million. I actually do know quite a lot, he said, but it's not appropriate for me to say anything right now. This is one of Lucasfilm's top secrets, and I've signed a confidentiality agreement. I don't want to get sued. Still, Duke revealed a small hint. Rey is not an ordinary girl. Her background is rather complicated. What he said was far from enough to satisfy the fans' curiosity. Using this interview as the lead, Warner Brothers and Lucasfilm officially launched their post-release marketing campaign, the core of which was to create buzz, spark discussion across the United States and the world, and complete Star Wars: The Force Awakens' evolution from media marketing to social marketing. The heroine Rey's true identity was undoubtedly one of the campaign's main focal points. As Duke's interview appeared online, it immediately became the hottest topic on the internet. Countless fans joined in, speculating about Rey's background. Duke's online PR teams also went into action again, continuously posting all kinds of comments online to increase the intensity and visibility of the discussion. On Twitter, Instant Share, and many other popular sites, in just half a day, the discussion about Rey had already turned into a major wave. Someone speculated, Rey is the daughter of Han Solo and Princess Leia. Not only did they believe Rey was Han Solo and Princess Leia's daughter, Kylo Ren's biological sister, but they even provided a detailed explanation. From the content of the film, Rey is definitely from a noble lineage, and her background is by no means ordinary. Then someone immediately refuted that, saying, Rey absolutely can't be the daughter of Han Solo and Princess Leia. It's understandable if her father, Han Solo, didn't recognize her, but her mother, Princess Leia, didn't show the slightest reaction either. And when Rey saw her visions through the Force, there were no clues whatsoever about Han Solo or Princess Leia. That person also shared their own theory. Rey is a descendant of Obi-Wan. Chapter 927, Rey's Mother. Chapter 927, Chapter 927, Rey's Mother. 100 people have 100 Hamlets in their hearts. Although the film revealed some hints, the debate among fans about Rey's identity grew even more heated. The information Duke provided in the movie was intentionally ambiguous, designed to spark controversy and discussion, because where there is debate, there is attention, and where there is attention, there will be widespread social discussion. Someone on Instant Share posted that Rey was a descendant of Obi-Wan, and with just that single message, without giving any detailed reasoning, others immediately left rebuttals. Rey is absolutely Luke Skywalker's daughter. This person even gave their reasoning. Rey's sensitivity to the Force is so strong, she defeats Kylo Ren, who's been training for ages, in just a few moves. Whether that's reasonable or not aside, someone who's self-taught to that level must have an exceptionally pure bloodline, right? Just as those words were posted, another person refuted them. There's a huge problem here. When did Luke ever have a kid's mom? The previous commenter fell silent for a while the original poster of that Instant Share thread finally typed out their own reasoning for believing Rey was Obi-Wan's descendant. Since Rey's strong connection to the Force must be tied to her pure bloodline, and judging from The Force Awakens, Rey's power even surpasses Luke's back in the day. If she's not one of Luke's descendants, who else could have such a strong Force sensitivity? Rey could be a descendant of Obi-Wan, the mentor who once guided Luke. Of course, such speculation always loops back to the same question. Who's the mother? It'd be a bit damaging to the heroic image of our Jedi protagonists if we suddenly claim that one of them accidentally fathered a child out of wedlock. And so, the topic naturally shifted to who Rey's mother was, and from there, discussions went completely off track. In this modern era, it's an undeniable fact that major discussions on the internet can deeply influence real-world society. The film's midnight premiere box office was high enough. By that logic, breaking records on its opening day wasn't a problem either. Duke created such a buzz, igniting countless debates, precisely to ensure that the film maintained a stable and healthy box office trajectory. The internet was filled with speculation about who Rey's father and mother were. Each related comment or theory easily attracted tens of thousands, or even hundreds of thousands, of views. Yet among all these voices, something seemed to be missing. Everyone assumed that Rey came from a famous lineage and possessed a pure Force bloodline, but no one speculated in the opposite direction. To further amplify the discussion, Duke's online PR team released another theory on Instant Share. Rey isn't connected to anyone. She's a completely new character, a brand new story, no ties to the old ones. The Force is everywhere, and it's not like only Obi-Wan, Luke, or Han Solo can have kids. Let Rey simply be a Force-sensitive girl in her own right. Many fans began to hope that the extended director's cut might provide an answer, but Duke announced via official Twitter and Instant Share that Star Wars: The Force Awakens would not have any extended version released. If you want to figure out who Rey really is, he said, go find the answers in the movie itself. Fans who hadn't yet seen The Force Awakens were still waiting in long lines to buy tickets, while those who had already watched it were so intrigued by all the speculation that they couldn't resist returning to the theaters. However, by Friday afternoon and evening, tickets for immediate showings were completely sold out. They could only buy tickets for the next day. Indeed, theaters across North America were practically bursting with crowds. From Friday afternoon all the way through the evening's prime hours, almost every showing of Star Wars: The Force Awakens was completely sold out. Many cinemas had to open additional auditoriums and screens for the movie, yet still couldn't meet the overwhelming demand. By Friday night, AMC, Empire Entertainment Group, and other major North American theater chains repeatedly increased the number of screenings for The Force Awakens. In mainstream commercial theaters, the film's screening ratio reached nearly 80%, yet the crowds waiting outside theaters showed no sign of decreasing. This resulted in an absolutely staggering opening day box office figure. A new North American single-day box office record has been born. Early Saturday morning, countless people saw that striking headline in newspapers and across the internet. On the Friday just past, all of North America was engulfed in Star Wars fever. On its opening day, Star Wars: The Force Awakens easily broke past the $100 million mark. According to the latest box office data, its first day total was approximately $165 million. Based on U.S. media analysis, after its first weekend, the film is expected to earn at least $300 million domestically. Directed by Duke Rosenberg, this brand new Star Wars film has lived up to expectations. Judging by current trends, it's certain to break multiple records. 1. Surpass the Avengers' $243.31 million opening weekend record. 2. Break Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2's $49.5 million midnight screening record. 3. Surpass the Avengers' $100.66 million Friday opening day record. In overseas markets, The Force Awakens is also dominating without competition. As of early this morning, the film ranked number 1 in box office earnings. Across 84 foreign territories, grossing about $286 million internationally. It shattered opening day records in the UK, Germany, Australia, and many other countries. Many now predict that The Force Awakens will ultimately surpass Avatar's $2.7 billion global box office record. Meanwhile, The Force Awakens has also received an overwhelmingly positive response from North American audiences. According to CinemaScore, the film's audience approval rating currently stands at 96%. It has also been selected by the AFI as one of the top 10 films of 2015. However, most of The Force Awakens pre-sales were concentrated on Thursday and Friday, driven mainly by Star Wars and Duke Rosenberg fans. This has led many media outlets to wait and observe Saturday's results, as the Saturday drop rate will directly indicate how long the film can maintain its momentum. Just as the media noted, if after the first day, especially once the crucial Friday and Saturday peaks past Star Wars, The Force Awakens' daily box office were to plunge, it would certainly fail to meet Duke and Lucasfilm's expectations. That's exactly why they engineered so many talking points in their marketing strategy. In today's era, every commercially successful film is the result of meticulous planning. Anyone who believes that having a famous director, big stars, and a powerful IP alone guarantees massive success, without investing significant time, effort, and money into marketing, is sorely mistaken. Such a film would inevitably fall far short of expectations, or even flop disastrously. Warner Brothers and Lucasfilm's strategy was crystal clear. While maintaining strong general publicity efforts, they would further amplify discussions and hype surrounding Rey's identity. On Saturday Night Live aired a pre-recorded Star Wars special episode. No publicity or marketing plan ever comes out of nowhere. Each is the result of meticulous planning and careful execution. The controversy surrounding Rey's identity as a promotional topic was no exception. Long before the film's release, Lucasfilm had already negotiated this special with Saturday Night Live and invited many people closely connected to Duke to participate in the recording. The guests appearing on the show were enough to make many other film crews envious. Leonardo DiCaprio, Charlize Theron, Sofia Coppola, and even Irene Lauder from outside the industry. And the topic they discussed in the program was only one. Who exactly is Rey? The beautiful, intelligent, and incredibly powerful female lead in Star Wars. The Force Awakens is truly eye-catching, and her mysterious background has drawn a lot of attention. In a CAF-like setting, Leonardo leaned back on the sofa, speaking as the host. At present, there are several popular theories. Rey is a descendant of Luke Skywalker. Rey is a descendant of Han Solo. Rey is a descendant of Obi-Wan. But all these answers can't avoid one question. Who is Rey's mother? After saying this, he looked at Charlize Theron. Among everyone present, only she had actually participated in the film's production. Charlize Theron shrugged. I don't know who it is either. I asked, but Duke wouldn't tell me. He only said that Rey's mother definitely isn't the character I played. Since they had already opened their minds to wild speculation, Leonardo and the others encouraged the audience to take it even further. Another cup of coffee. After the temporary actor playing the CAF waiter served fresh cups to everyone gathered around the table, Leonardo continued. Now, please pick up your coffee cups, and let's play a little deduction game together. Charlize Theron, Irene Lauder, and Sofia Coppola each picked up their cups and took a sip. Turning his cup slowly, Leonardo went on. Here are the clues we already know. Rey is an orphan. She has an exceptional talent for mechanics and is very skilled at piloting. She lives alone on Jakku as if waiting for someone. Her sensitivity to the Force is extremely high, even able to defeat Kylo Ren, who trained from childhood as a Skywalker, with ease despite having no formal training. She can hear the call of Anakin's lightsaber, and through Kylo Ren's intrusion into her mind, we learn that she often dreams of the ocean and an island within it, and also the scenes that appear in Rey's vision, Sofia Coppola added, setting down her cup. In the Cloud City vision, Rey sees Luke's duel with Darth Vader, then sees Luke resting his hand on R2-D2 amid ruins, Kylo Ren massacring the Jedi Academy, and finally a 5- or 6-year-old Rey wearing a Jedi youngling robe being left on Jakku. Interestingly, Obi-Wan's voice in that sequence comes from both of his actors. All right, those are all the clues we know. Leonardo looked toward the other three. So what do you think? Chapter 928. The brain hole becomes a black hole. Chapter 928. Chapter 928. The brain hole becomes a black hole. Where exactly are the sea and the island Rey sees in her dreams? As the only outsider present, Irene Lauder rested her crossed hands on the coffee table and voiced her doubts. At the end of the film, Rey finds Luke on an island in the middle of a vast ocean. Could the island in her dream be this place? Just like how Rey once saw herself in the snowy forest through her vision? Or could it be somewhere she once lived? An ocean and an island. There's a very suspicious place in the Star Wars series that fits that description. Charlize Theron rested her chin in one hand and continued. Do you remember the cloning facility located in the Kaminoan Ocean? Huh. Irene Lauder slightly opened her mouth, looking rather surprised. You mean, could Rey be a clone? Charlize Theron nodded. Kamino was the backyard factory of the Galactic Empire for producing clone soldiers. As the Sith Lord and leader of the Empire, Darth Sidious lost his apprentice and successively lured Count Dooku and Anakin Skywalker to the dark side. Even with the mighty Darth Vader as his right hand, might he have still left himself another backup plan? What if, in that same backyard, he used Vader as a genetic template and, through modification, created a Force-born daughter even more powerful than the chosen one, Rey? And after the fall of the Galactic Empire, this girl was raised by the Jedi? It could be said that Charlize Theron's imagination was big enough to swallow the galaxy. Indeed, that would explain why Rey has such mechanical talent, why she can be called by the lightsaber, and why she is stronger than Kylo Ren, whose bloodline has been diluted by ordinary humans. After saying that, Leonardo questioned, "But is that even possible?" "It's possible," Sofia Coppola replied, "but not very likely." She was the one most familiar with Star Wars among them. Star Wars: The Force Awakens is set 29 years after the Battle of Jakku. Based on Rey's visions, she's younger than Kylo Ren. If this theory were true, the timeline wouldn't add up. Sophia continued expanding the discussion. "Have you noticed? In The Force Awakens, the supreme leader of the First Order, Snoke, is also a mysterious figure." Irene Lauder followed up. "So far, all we know is that Snoke is a very powerful dark side Force user." Duke once clearly stated that Kylo Ren is not a Sith, Charlize Theron reminded. But Snoke's behavior is eerily similar to the Emperor of the Galactic Empire. Darth Sidious. The First Order's operational model is practically a carbon copy of the Empire. Their weapons are upgraded Imperial technology, and Snoke, like Sidious, prefers to speak from behind holograms. Suddenly, her eyes widened. Could it be? Darth Sidious never died. Unlikely. Sofia Coppola shook her head. After Darth Sidious was thrown into the Death Star's energy core by Vader, his survival rate was nearly zero. More importantly, Snoke seems to despise the Sith. Let's go back to Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. As Chancellor Palpatine, Darth Sidious once mentioned his master, Darth Plagueis, while tempting Anakin Skywalker. Everyone turned to look at Sofia Coppola, listening to her analysis. He said this: Darth Plagueis was a dark lord of the Sith, so powerful and so wise that he could use the Force to influence the midi-chlorians to create life. He had such knowledge of the dark side that he could even keep the ones he cared about from dying. The dark side of the Force is a pathway to many abilities some consider to be unnatural. He became so powerful that the only thing he feared was losing his power, which eventually, of course, he did. Unfortunately, he taught his apprentice everything he knew, and his apprentice killed him in his sleep. Ironic, isn't it? He could save others from death, but not himself. At this point, Sophia asked the others, "But did Darth Plagueis really fail to save himself? Could someone with such profound understanding of the dark side of the Force truly have been destroyed by his apprentice?" The program was proceeding exactly according to the planned script. Leonardo, Charlize Theron, and Sofia Coppola all wore expressions of intrigue. Sophia took the lead again. "Let's take a look at Supreme Leader Snoke's appearance. His face is so deformed and twisted that his original species is unrecognizable, but his limbs are long and thin." She continued, "Have you seen the Star Wars expanded works? Darth Plagueis was immune. Though he never appeared in the main films, we can reference the Muun Intergalactic Banking Clan chairman, San Hill, same elongated head, same gaunt frame, same spindly limbs. Darth Plagueis taught his apprentice everything, even handed over the new order he created. But now, perhaps, it's time for him to take everything back." Sophia concluded confidently, "The First Order isn't a continuation of the Galactic Empire. It's the original New Order, the First Order. And he hates the Sith, but he still needed an apprentice and soldiers. So he gathered troops across the galaxy, drew Kylo Ren into the dark side, but knowing he must guard against betrayal, what could he do?" The others looked puzzled, shaking their heads. Sophia gave the answer. "He could use the Force to influence midi-chlorians and create life. After all, what could be a more loyal apprentice than one you create yourself?" Then she declared, "So, after creating the Knights of Ren, Snoke once again created life. That life is Rey." Charlize Theron didn't agree and was the first to refute. "Then how do you explain all those scenes of Rey's past in the film? The perfect life form created by a Dark Lord. Unfortunately, she was too perfect. So perfect, she turned to the light." Sophia spread her hands, speaking as if it were self-evident. "In Star Wars, villains fall from light to darkness, but the life created by a dark master rises toward the light. Thus, the contradiction resolves itself." Leonardo and the others froze for a moment, seemingly stunned by Sofia Coppola's imagination. Unaffected, Sophia continued, "So, all of Rey's extraordinary powers are explained. She is as pure in Force sensitivity as the Chosen One himself, a Force-born daughter created for the balance of the Force. Irene Lauder seemed to recover from her shock and, turning her brain whole into a black hole, said jokingly, "So, at the end of this new trilogy, will Snoke tell Rey? I am." At once, everyone, including even the previously imaginative Sofia Coppola, was left completely speechless. Not only had Irene Lauder's brain hole expanded into a black hole, but Charlize Theron's thoughts had also flown into the distant sky. She turned to Sofia Coppola and said, "Maybe what you said makes some sense. Following your line of thought, I've come up with some new ideas too." Leonardo immediately urged, "Let's hear it." "I think Rey is a genetic composite clone of Luke and Leia, or you could say, Anakin's third child." Charlize Theron explained in detail. Anakin possessed perfect Force talent, but his personality had major flaws. He fell into the dark side. Luke and Leia each inherited the strengths of Anakin and Amidala, but were not perfect. Rey, combining the advantages of both Anakin and Amidala, could be considered Luke and Leia's younger sister, cultivated through genetic methods. That's why she has Anakin's scavenging, repair, and piloting skills, as well as Amidala's firm character and kind nature. She shrugged and added at last, "Of course, this is just my personal speculation." By this point in the program, Leonardo DiCaprio was the only one who hadn't clearly stated his opinion. Aaron Lauder asked, "Leo, what do you think?" "I feel that Rey's identity is hinted at through details in the film." Leonardo thought for a moment before speaking. "Let me start with my conclusion. Rey is either Luke's daughter or a Force-sensitive adopted by Luke, or possibly both. But personally, I lean toward her being Luke's daughter." "Evidence?" Sofia Coppola asked. "First, the initial characterization. When Rey first met BB-8, she said, 'Secret. Actually, I'm a secret too. I know what it feels like to wait for my family.' This sets the earliest groundwork for Rey's background and serves as a foreshadowing for her later Force awakening." As if after careful thought, Leonardo listed his reasoning in an orderly manner. Second, Rey's piloting skills. When Rey and Finn were chased by the First Order on Jakku and prepared to find a ship to escape, Finn said, "We need a pilot." Rey replied, "We already have one." Up to that point, the film hadn't provided any explanation or build-up for Rey's piloting abilities. Yet immediately after the two boarded the Millennium Falcon, Rey demonstrated exceptional piloting skills, shaking off and destroying two pursuing TIE fighters. As we all know, extraordinary piloting skills are a super buff inherited by the Skywalker family. Third, the lightsaber in Maz's basement. In Maz's tavern, Rey heard the cries of her younger self. Following the sound, she found the lightsaber once wielded by both Anakin Skywalker and Luke Skywalker. This represents the inheritance of the Force, or the passing of the protagonist's aura. Personally, I believe this implies Rey has an unusually close connection with the Skywalker family. Fourth, Rey's Force vision. Upon touching the Skywalker family lightsaber, Rey saw Force-induced hallucinations. The desert of Jakku, someone handing young Rey to a Jakku scavenger, and then a spaceship flying away. The Cloud City corridor where Luke and Vader dueled. An unknown place where Luke touched R2-D2. A stormy wasteland where Kylo Ren killed a Jedi apprentice, leaving corpses everywhere. And finally, Obi-Wan Kenobi's voice. "This is your first trial." These should be a mix of Rey's memories and hints about her identity. Therefore, Rey is definitely not her real name. Chapter 929. The plot of the next two Star Wars films. Chapter 929. Chapter 929. The plot of the next two Star Wars films. My personal opinion. At the end of the program, Leonardo DiCaprio said firmly, "Her name should be Rey Skywalker." This discussion program about Rey's identity achieved the highest ratings Saturday Night Live had seen in 5 years. Since Duke had already maintained close communication with the show's production company and the network, the full episode was uploaded online the very next day. This further fueled the discussion, drawing more and more people into the debate. Many viewers, after watching the program, returned to the theaters to search for evidence supporting their own theories. Leonardo DiCaprio's statement received considerable support on the internet. "I watched Star Wars: The Force Awakens again and realized I did miss a few things. After Rey regains consciousness from her vision, Maz tells her that this is the awakening of the Force, that the Force is calling to her. Rey replies that she wants to go back to Jakku. Maz then says, "You know they're never coming back, except for one." Rey then asks, "Luke?" Maz admits, "Yes. So you must find Luke. Take the lightsaber." I think that's a very important piece of evidence. Of course, where there is support, there is also opposition, and that was one of the goals of the episode. Some people firmly believe that Rey should be a descendant of Obi-Wan. To prove their theories, they too bought tickets repeatedly and returned to the cinema for multiple viewings. Remember the line Rey? Yes, the voice Rey hears during her vision after taking the lightsaber. That's the voice of Ewan McGregor, the actor who plays Obi-Wan. It's Obi-Wan's voice. The fact that Rey hears Obi-Wan's voice instead of Luke's says a lot. Attached to this post was a clip from an interview with Ewan McGregor given the day before. In the video, Ewan McGregor said, "I was called in to record a single line for Star Wars 7. I'd been waiting for Duke to call me for 2 years. I thought maybe they'd lost my agent's number. Then, just as Star Wars 7 was about to premiere, Duke finally called and invited me to join the project, but it turned out just to record one line." He said it was for a very crucial scene where they needed Obi-Wan's voice. The film's real-world release directly influenced public opinion online. The debates on the internet drew even more attention, pulling countless people back into theaters and generating massive box office numbers. As the discussion continued, opinions about Rey's identity split into two major camps. One believed she was Luke Skywalker's daughter, the other that she was Obi-Wan's descendant. After Ewan McGregor's interview clip went viral, another rebuttal quickly appeared. Actually, Duke, as the director, has already told us the answer within the film itself. As someone very sensitive to faces, my biggest impression while watching Star Wars, The Force Awakens was that Leia's son looks like Anakin, while Rey looks like Padme. So, Rey is very likely a member of the Skywalker family. Whose child is Rey then? First of all, don't even think about Leia having an affair. That's not the worldview Duke promotes. And if Leia and Han had a daughter, they wouldn't need to hide her or pretend not to know her later. That leaves only Luke, the flawless character of Star Wars. If Rey was sent to an unknown planet as a baby and raised by others, wouldn't that create a sense of classic return? The Skywalker family shares many traits: losing hands, scavenging junk. Why does no one suspect adoption? Let's wait and see. Behind the two mainstream theories, there were also some rather unconventional ones. Rey's mother is Princess Leia, but, like Anakin, she was conceived through midichlorian manipulation by the Sith. The blame was then shifted to Luke, causing a rift among the classic trio of Leia, Han, and Luke. After Kylo Ren learned the truth, he broke down and fell to the dark side. Luke, guilt-ridden, went into seclusion. Han Solo, believing he'd been betrayed, left home and returned to his old smuggling ways. The mastermind behind it all is Snoke, Palpatine's son. There was even a theory that Palpatine's son, due to the influence of the Force, was born with 3 eyes. I didn't notice if that Sith in Episode 7 had that feature. Looks like I'll need to rewatch to confirm. There were even Chinese fans, whose English was excellent, who'd watched the movie in Hong Kong and climbed the Great Firewall to share their thoughts online. Rey's Force is so powerful that it's unreasonable to think she's not a Skywalker. But introducing a new mother figure wouldn't fit the usual writing pattern. So if Rey is indeed a Skywalker, and her mother has already appeared in canon, what would that mean? The first 4 words that popped into my head were German orthopedics. In that case, her overwhelming Force power and her abandonment on Jakku would both make perfect sense. American fans couldn't understand what German orthopedics meant and expressed their confusion. The fan from China left just one clarifying word: siblings. Aren't you fluent in Chinese? In the lounge of the Duke Manor, Scarlett Johansson closed the webpage she had just been reading and asked Duke, who was calmly sipping his tea, "What does German orthopedics mean? Does it have a special meaning in Chinese?" Duke thought carefully for a moment. He had a vague impression but couldn't fully explain it, so he said briefly, "He means Rey is the child of Luke and Princess Leia." Scarlett frowned slightly and deliberately asked, "Brother and sister? Is that even possible?" Hearing this, Duke really didn't feel like answering her, though he didn't bother to elaborate either. After all, in the upper classes of Western history, Intermarriage to preserve bloodlines wasn't uncommon. But Star Wars could never feature that kind of plot. It wasn't some pretentious art house film pretending to be deep. It was as mainstream as a movie could get. Shaking his head, Duke discarded Scarlett's absurd speculation and picked up the statistical report beside him. The Saturday data for Star Wars: The Force Awakens. The film's opening day box office had been so astonishing that it was impossible to maintain that level of revenue. Duke knew this well and had mentally prepared himself for a sharp drop the following day. However, fueled by the heated debates, the Saturday numbers fell by only 37% from Friday's opening of about $165 million, still surpassing the $100 million mark, bringing in around $104 million, setting a new all-time record for the best second-day box office in history. In just 2 days, Star Wars: The Force Awakens not only broke the $200 million mark in North America, but also soared past $250 million, setting new records for the fastest film to reach both milestones. Duke knew full well that Star Wars: The Force Awakens was destined to become the first film in history to exceed $300 million in its opening weekend in North America. Even if someone were to launch a nuclear missile at America right now, nothing could stop it from becoming reality. Hurry and come see this, dear. Sitting in front of the computer, Scarlett Johansson's voice pulled Duke out of his thoughts. Someone online who supports the theory that Rey is a descendant of Obi-Wan wrote a follow-up storyline. It actually looks somewhat plausible. Really, since Scarlett was interested, Duke cooperated and walked over, sitting beside her to take a look. It was just a story summary. This fan was obviously a supporter of the Rey is Obi-Wan's descendant theory and intentionally used the guise of a supposed leaked plot to back up his point. 5 years have passed since the destruction of Starkiller Base. Because of Finn's betrayal, Snoke has gradually lost trust in General Hux and the Stormtrooper Corps. Hux's political rival, General Fett, takes the opportunity to propose restarting the clone program to Supreme Leader Snoke, and Snoke approves. The Resistance intercepts intelligence that the First Order is secretly building a new Starkiller base on another planet. General Leia Organa sends pilot Poe and Finn, disguised as stormtroopers, to infiltrate the First Order and destroy the base's construction data. After infiltrating, the two discover it's a trap set by Kylo Ren. Poe escapes with Finn's cover, but Finn is captured by Ren. Through the Force, Ren learns the location of the Resistance headquarters, but fails to find Luke and Rey. By the time R2-D2 revealed the galactic coordinates in Episode 7, Finn had already been injured and unconscious. Rey trains with Luke to learn the Force and lightsaber techniques. Luke, having realized from the Jedi Temple that balance in the Force means harmony between light and dark, warns Rey not to fear the temptation of the dark side. Facing the darkness will be part of her future training. Rey asks Luke about her origins, and he guides her to the Jedi Temple to seek answers. Inside the Jedi Temple, Rey learns about the origins of the Jedi, deepening her understanding of the Force and obtaining the lost Jedi scriptures. Finally, she witnesses a series of visions. Obi-Wan's voice appears once more, guiding her to see that, as a child, she had been trained by Luke in the Jedi Order. After Kylo Ren's betrayal, Luke sealed her memories and left her on Jakku before departing to find the Jedi Temple. Then Darth Vader appears in the vision, telling Rey that a part of his Force essence has awakened within her and urging her to inherit his lightsaber. Rey refuses Vader's invitation and recounts the vision to Luke. Luke hints that she carries Obi-Wan's bloodline, that the light side of Vader's spirit was reborn through her, and tells her she will become the Force's balance in the universe. Rey doesn't want to be a savior. She only came to Luke to uncover her identity. Luke tells her that the Force will guide her to find her own path. Following BB-8's coordinates, pilot Poe finds Luke and Rey. Rey deduces that Ren must have learned the Resistance's location from Finn. Poe and Chewbacca pilot the Millennium Falcon back to headquarters to warn the Resistance of the coming threat. Rey leaves in Poe's fighter. Guided by the Force, she finds the mysterious Maz. With Maz's help and using knowledge from the Jedi scriptures, Rey reforges her staff into a lightsaber, similar to Darth Maul's weapon from the Phantom Menace. During the forging, she infuses her Force into it, making the weapon an extension of her own power, one that only answers to her call. Maz tells Rey that darkness is rising once again, and she must resist it. Chapter 930, The Goddess of Fate. Chapter 930, Chapter 930, The Goddess of Fate. This story outline seems to be written quite well. Taking her eyes off the computer screen, Scarlett Johansson turned to look at Duke beside her and asked, "Could this have been leaked by one of your insiders?" Duke glared at her. "You're overthinking it." This online version did indeed seem quite convincing, because it was basically adapted directly from the original Star Wars trilogy storyline, with the deliberate addition of the idea that Rey was a descendant of Obi-Wan, all to support that particular theory. However, that wasn't to say this fan-made story was useless, so Duke continued reading. Rey doesn't want to bear such a heavy burden. She only wishes to save her friend, but Maz tells her that this journey will bring the most severe trials. Maz watches Rey's ship depart, and beside her appears a faint green shadow. Guided by the Force, Rey finds Finn. Waiting for her is Kylo Ren, who has completed his dark side training and seeks to wash away his previous shame. Rey and Ren battle once more. Ren is defeated by Rey and has his right hand severed. At that moment, Supreme Leader Snoke appears, demonstrating the immense power of the dark side, and makes an offer. If Rey submits to him and learns the dark side, he will release Finn. Rey accepts Snoke's condition. Finn insists on staying by her side and confesses his feelings to her. Rey tells Finn she has her own mission and that he will always be her friend in her heart. Finn returns to the Resistance headquarters in disappointment. The war between the Resistance and the First Order erupts once again. This is the final opportunity Snoke gives to Hux and the Stormtrooper Corps. The Stormtroopers invade the Resistance base, and fierce battles break out both in space and on the planet. Poe's fighter squadron is unable to destroy the enemy's main ship. Finn, returning just in time, infiltrates the enemy fleet with Chewbacca. Finn persuades Captain Phasma and more stormtroopers to remove their helmets and defect from the First Order. With the help of the defectors, the Resistance defeats the Stormtrooper army, and General Hux is killed by Finn. Poe's squadron destroys the Star Destroyer, achieving great merit, but Leia reminds the Resistance that the war is not yet over and senses that her son is suffering. Meanwhile, one of the First Order's generals creates a new army of black-armored clone troopers from his own template and prepares to launch another war against the Resistance. Kylo Ren's defeat leads him to question the dark side. The guilt of patricide torments him. Snoke tells Kylo Ren that his failure stems from arrogance, that although he inherited Darth Vader's dark power, Vader himself once lost to Obi-Wan due to pride. Snoke believes Kylo Ren needs more trials and orders him to join the clone army to annihilate the Resistance and the light side. Finn asks Poe to take him to Luke, pleading for Luke to rescue Rey. Snoke converses with a weakened spirit. "My lord, I have found a Force sensitive with even greater potential. If she falls to the dark side, she may help restore your life. Bring her to me at the Sith Temple." After finishing reading this fan's imagined plots for the next 2 Star Wars films, Duke looked at the comments below. The page views were enormous. Although this was merely fan fiction, it actually benefited the publicity of Star Wars: The Force Awakens to some extent. Duke then called Tina Fey, instructing her to contact the media and the fan who wrote it, so that this hype-worthy storyline could quickly appear in print media. The joint post-release promotional campaign launched by Duke, Warner Brothers, and Lucasfilm played a crucial role in stabilizing The Force Awakens' box office performance, particularly in preventing Saturday and Sunday revenues from suffering a sharp drop. The film's daily box office never declined by more than 40%. For most films, a drop of more than 30% in daily box office during opening weekend would make producers and distributors anxious. But this rule didn't apply to a film like Star Wars: The Force Awakens. Everyone knew it was impossible for the movie to maintain over $150 million in daily revenue for 2 consecutive days, let alone achieve the near-impossible miracle of surpassing $100 million per day for 3 straight days. Thanks to the non-stop wave of coordinated publicity and topic creation, combined with Duke's influence and the Star Wars brand itself, The Force Awakens successfully elevated its marketing from media level to full-scale social marketing. For most moviegoers, their interest in a film comes from attention to stars, plot, and special effects. Few people care who works behind the scenes to refine and deliver these selling points, and that is precisely the role of film marketing. The actual investment in film marketing is difficult to quantify, but given the immense profits distributed in this massive market, the commercial potential of the marketing sector is self-evident. In Hollywood's current reality, small and medium-budget films usually enter the marketing stage only after production, whereas annual blockbuster films often bring in professional marketing and distribution teams as early as the planning phase to develop comprehensive strategies. For these teams, the core task of publicity and promotion is to collaborate with the production and distribution sides to extract the film's key selling points at each stage and convey them to the audience. Unlike ordinary brand marketing, a film itself contains abundant narrative resources that can feed back into branding and create discussion topics. Of course, when a single film lacks enough original content, marketers can analyze and align it with current social hot topics to generate relevance. In practical terms, traditional media, live events, and new media or internet promotions are unavoidable components of any film marketing campaign. The effectiveness of message reach and market conversion rate during execution are key measures of a marketing team's creativity and execution capabilities. Undoubtedly, both Duke's own team and Warner Brothers' publicity department excelled in these areas. As a result, with the film's quality fully guaranteed and bolstered by Duke's and the Star Wars brand's immense appeal, it was only natural that The Force Awakens would explode at the box office during its opening weekend. On Monday morning, in a seaside villa on Long Island, New York, Natalie Portman had just finished helping her son with breakfast. After handing him to the nanny to take to the garden, she picked up that day's edition of the New York Times. Unlike usual, the newspaper's front page headline wasn't about politics or social affairs, but rather about Hollywood and the film industry. Duke Rosenberg breaks North American opening record once again, Star Wars. The Force Awakens becomes the first film ever to surpass $300 million in its opening weekend. Sitting on the sofa in the living room, Natalie Portman saw the headline, and her thoughts drifted back to the past. How many times had Duke Rosenberg broken the North American opening record now? Independence Day, The Matrix, The Lord of the Rings trilogy, The Dark Knight, The Avengers. So many that she couldn't even count anymore. Thinking of this, Natalie couldn't help but laugh softly. After all these years, she still remembered everything about Duke Rosenberg clearly. Many things she still couldn't forget. Perhaps that was what people called fate. She knew what kind of person Duke Rosenberg was, and she couldn't help but feel that the girl named Daisy Ridley was truly fortunate. Just because her temperament resembled her own, she had earned the favor of the goddess of fate. The goddess of fate, huh? Natalie Portman couldn't help but shake her head. Since when did she start equating Duke Rosenberg with the goddess of fate? But deep down, she knew very well that for Hollywood actors, wasn't Duke Rosenberg the very god who could change their destiny? Putting those thoughts aside, Natalie Portman turned her attention back to the New York Times in front of her. The North American film market during the penultimate weekend of 2014 was completely ignited by Star Wars: The Force Awakens. This powerful force finally broke the nearly month-long slump in the North American box office, giving the Christmas season a spectacular opening. Released by Warner Brothers and directed by Duke Rosenberg, the sci-fi sequel Star Wars: The Force Awakens stormed into theaters with an astonishing $344.51 million opening weekend, effortlessly shattering the all-time North American opening weekend record and surpassing the record set by The Avengers by nearly $100 million. With a production budget of $200 million, the film was helmed by one of Hollywood's top-tier directors, Duke Rosenberg. The original trilogy's classic trio, Mark Hamill, Harrison Ford, and Carrie Fisher, fully returned, while Daisy Ridley, Daniel Wu, Lee Pace, and Oscar Isaac took on the new generation of roles. The screenplay was personally written by Duke Rosenberg himself. The film held its premiere screening at 7 p.m. Thursday night in Los Angeles, where the midnight screenings grossed an explosive $72 million, breaking the 4-year-old record previously held by Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, Part 2, and nearly doubling that figure. By Friday, the film expanded to 4,534 theaters across North America, the largest December release in history. raking in $165 million on its opening day, setting a brand new single-day box office record and surpassing the 2-year-old mark set by the Avengers. Although the film consumed tremendous momentum on its first day, its subsequent performance showed no signs of typical fan movie fatigue. It went on to collect $140 million on Saturday and another $75.51 million on Sunday, bringing Star Wars: The Force Awakens to a final opening weekend total of $344.51 million. Based on the film's reputation and historical trends for this release window, it's almost certain that its North American box office will soar past the $700 million mark, and it's not impossible that it may even challenge Avatar for the title of the highest-grossing film in North American history. The opening weekend audience was predominantly male, accounting for 58%, while 49% were under 25, proving that the Star Wars series has not suffered a cultural gap among younger audiences. The film's per-theater average reached $75,000, setting a new record for the highest per-theater average among wide releases. Chapter 931. Born to Break Records. Chapter 931. Chapter 931. Born to Break Records. In a Manhattan skyscraper, another person who had once been closely connected with Duke Rosenberg was also paying attention to the performance of Star Wars: The Force Awakens. After working busily for most of the day, Ivanka Trump temporarily put down her work. After reading the box office report in the New York Times, she habitually opened the Instant Share website. Although she had long been forced to sell her shares to Google, it did not stop her from using Instant Share to stay updated with the latest social trends. The Instant Share of today was clearly different from before. Everywhere was filled with news about Star Wars: The Force Awakens, and countless users were showering it with praise. Star Wars: The Force Awakens isn't perfect, but Duke paid meticulous attention to every detail and ensured precision. You can go in with the highest expectations and still not be disappointed. Seeing that familiar name, Ivanka Trump froze for a moment, sighed lightly, and continued scrolling through the fan comments. Perhaps because of that past relationship, she had remained quite attentive to Hollywood's hit movies over the years, especially Duke's films, and still kept the habit of reading audience feedback online after each release. The narrative style Duke Rosenberg used in Star Wars: The Force Awakens is highly successful. It unfolds naturally, yet progresses steadily, continually bringing unexpected surprises. Praise, countless words of praise. That was what Ivanka Trump saw in the audience reviews. Duke Rosenberg rediscovered the key structural elements of the original trilogy, making The Force Awakens a film filled with both laughter and tears. Sometimes joyful, sometimes sad, both thrilling and a bit foolish. It evokes once again the feeling of watching A New Hope. He was still the darling of movie fans. Ivanka sighed to herself. Through Star Wars: The Force Awakens, Duke Rosenberg injected new energy into a once hollowed-out franchise, revitalizing its beauty and pointing the series toward a new direction. Although she hadn't seen the movie and no longer had any contact with Duke, and even stood on the opposite side of him now, Ivanka Trump was certain these comments reflected genuine reactions. Countless past examples had already proven that Duke Rosenberg was not only as powerful as ever, but was still growing stronger. Thinking of that man, so familiar in her memories, yet so distant in reality, Ivanka Trump couldn't help but drift into thought. The relationship they once shared was still hard to forget, but she knew clearly that there was no going back. Their love had brought them together, but their breakup stemmed from conflicts of interest. Their opposing positions had long since turned them into strangers. Just like before, Duke Rosenberg would never abandon the interests of the capital group he led. And what about herself? Ivanka Trump knew she too could not disregard the fundamental interests of the Trump organization. What's more, under the drive of sufficient profit, Duke Rosenberg had once delivered an almost fatal blow to the Trump group. Back then, despite several conversations between her and Duke Rosenberg, she failed to stop him from selling his Instant Share holdings to Google, allowing Google to become the company's largest shareholder, with over half of the voting rights, while he, in return, gained a portion of Google's shares and became its largest shareholder. Looking back now, that deal had been incredibly lucrative. Google's future seemed limitless. Duke Rosenberg was the greatest beneficiary of that transaction, while the Trump family became its biggest victim. Under Google's aggressive expansion, especially when the 2008 subprime mortgage crisis triggered a real estate collapse, she was forced to sell her remaining instant share stock to rescue the Trump Organization's assets. Although the Trump Group managed to survive despite suffering heavy losses, the reality proved that the deal had not been worth it. Now, with Google's full backing, Instant Share had become the world's largest social and online video media platform. Ivanka Trump felt deeply unwilling, yet she knew there was nothing she could do. She had even strongly opposed her father's idea of joining forces with Walt Disney to retaliate against Duke Rosenberg. She was one of the few people in the world who understood Duke Rosenberg best. If this had been before 2008, perhaps the Trump Organization could have competed with him. But now, it would be like throwing an egg at a rock. They simply didn't have the strength. Even with Disney's help, they could not match him. As someone who had once shared his bed, Ivanka Trump knew that ever since Duke Rosenberg had formally entered the war of fame and fortune, he had never fought alone. He never believed in the power of the individual to oppose an entire capital group, nor did he believe that success could be easily and naturally achieved by one man's effort. Surrounding him were countless allies: Warner Brothers, Time Warner, Google, and many other intertwined interest groups, all far beyond the Trump Organization's ability to resist. Even leaving those aside, Duke Rosenberg alone was already too powerful for the Trump Group to confront. After all, this was a nation built on money and business. His personal fortune ranked among the top 5 in the world. It was no empty number. And could a man like Duke Rosenberg possibly avoid networking with those in power to further expand his influence? Ivanka would never believe it. When she had been by his side, she had already seen him build intricate connections with the Pentagon, the FBI, and even the White House. Moreover, he was a supporter of the Democratic Party. Ivanka Trump frowned. Her father, Donald Trump, was preparing to participate in the next election and had already gained considerable support within the Republican Party. Yet every time she thought of Duke, she couldn't help but feel uneasy. Perhaps to ordinary movie fans, Duke Rosenberg was a great director who brought them countless amazing films. Perhaps to the public, he was a generous philanthropist who donated huge sums every year. Perhaps to those close to him, like Scarlett Johansson, he was a considerate friend and family member. But Ivanka Trump knew all too well, Duke Rosenberg was by no means a good person. Behind that calm and gentle face lies nothing but coldness and ruthlessness. Unconsciously, Ivanka Trump spoke those words aloud. He had deep resentment toward her father, Donald Trump, perhaps even hatred. Would he really stand by and watch her father become the master of the White House? One person's power might be limited, but the power of capital and capital groups in this country. Ivanka Trump was not foolish. She had never believed in this nation's so-called fair and just elections. Only idiots would believe that such a process was fair or that it truly reflected the people's free choice. In the future, the Trump Organization and Duke Rosenberg would inevitably face each other head-on. Yet the moment she imagined standing against that unshakable figure, Ivanka Trump instantly lost all confidence, realizing that her side's chances of victory were infinitely close to zero. With a long sigh, Ivanka Trump's gaze returned to the computer screen before her. After closing Instant Share, she unconsciously opened another website related to film. In the most prominent position on the page, there was once again news about Star Wars: The Force Awakens. Unlike traditional print media such as the New York Times, the internet provided faster and more convenient feedback. The most eye-catching headline on the site was the freshly released global box office report for Star Wars: The Force Awakens. Duke Rosenberg once again shatters the global opening weekend box office record. Star Wars: The Force Awakens dominates the world. Seeing such a headline and those numbers, Ivanka Trump instinctively clicked on the link. Since its official release in North America last weekend, Star Wars: The Force Awakens has been unstoppable, continuously setting new records. For North American opening weekend box office, single-day box office, and midnight premiere revenue. However, there seemed to be one record the film had yet to surpass: the global opening weekend box office held by the Avengers released 2 years ago. As of this morning, The Force Awakens' estimated global opening weekend gross stood at $587.6 million, slightly behind the Avengers' $591.05 million. But with the final adjusted numbers now released, the record has officially been broken. Star Wars: The Force Awakens achieved a global opening weekend total of $595.15 million, surpassing the Avengers by $4 million. This record-breaking result is undoubtedly good news for the film, especially considering that it has yet to open in China, the world's second-largest box office market. 2 years ago, the Avengers' global opening weekend already included its Chinese box office revenue. Even without that crucial territory, The Force Awakens has managed to conquer markets across the globe. In summary, this is only the beginning for Star Wars: The Force Awakens. The film is set to open in China in early January next year, and its performance in the world's second-largest box office market is highly anticipated. Meanwhile, its domestic run in North America looks strong, and the arrival of the Christmas holidays in Europe and America will provide the perfect timing for it to continue breaking records. At present, the biggest question Star Wars: The Force Awakens leaves us with is this: can it surpass the $760.5 million North American box office record and the $2.78796 billion global box office record held by Avatar? We shall wait and see. Although she was no industry expert, Ivanka Trump only had to think briefly about Star Wars: The Force Awakens' North American box office, audience reputation, and trajectory to be certain that it would definitely break Avatar's North American record, though the global record would be harder to say. Her gaze shifted downward, landing on a list detailing the many records Star Wars: The Force Awakens had already shattered. Ivanka Trump couldn't help but sigh softly. Duke Rosenberg truly seemed born to break records. Chapter 932: Buying the Box Office. Chapter 932. Chapter 932. Buying the Box Office. The film had been in theaters for only one weekend, yet Star Wars: The Force Awakens had already created a string of box office records. Midnight premiere record, $72 million. Friday and single-day box office record, $165 million. The first film to surpass $150 million in a single day. Fastest to reach $100 million, $150 million, and $200 million. December opening weekend record, 4 times that of the previous record holder, The Hobbit: An Unexpected Journey, which made $84.6 million. IMAX midnight record, IMAX single-day record of $34 million, and IMAX opening weekend record of $70.1 million. Wide release opening weekend per theater average record, $75,000. Broke opening weekend records in the United Kingdom, Australia, Russia, Germany, Sweden, Norway, Finland, Austria, Poland, Denmark, Romania, Hungary, Bulgaria, Croatia, Ukraine, Iceland, Serbia, and New Zealand. Ranked second in opening weekend history in France, Belgium, Israel, and Chile. Global IMAX premiere record, $98 million. North American opening weekend record, $344.51 million. Global opening weekend record, $595.15 million. Ivanka Trump then looked through the North American movie release schedules for January and February. In those 2 months, there were no heavyweight films scheduled for release, meaning there would be nothing capable of posing a real threat to Star Wars: The Force Awakens. How high could its final box office go? She would continue to keep an eye on the film's performance. No one could say for certain how far the movie would ultimately go, or whether it could surpass Avatar's $2.7 billion in global box office. But Duke knew very well that if he wanted to achieve truly massive box office results, even with the film's current heat, he still needed to intensify the marketing push. After Star Wars: The Force Awakens shattered both the Avengers' North American and global opening weekend records, another of Duke's companies immediately sent their congratulations. Marvel Studios posted on its official Twitter, Instant Share, and several websites a new poster. In it, the Avengers' brains and commander, Captain America, hung a golden medal around BB-8's neck. This was also a long-standing Hollywood tradition, one that actually originated from George Lucas and Steven Spielberg. Back then, when Star Wars surpassed Jaws at the box office, Jaws director Steven Spielberg sent an illustration congratulating Star Wars director George Lucas. Later, when Jurassic Park surpassed Star Wars, Lucas sent a similar congratulatory image to Spielberg. Meanwhile, Duke also posted an image on his official Twitter and instant share, linking together the Avengers Black Widow Natasha Romanoff and Captain America Steve Rogers to formally invite Star Wars, The Force Awakens Rey, and the adorable BB-8 to join the Avengers. North American fans' imaginations immediately went wild. Could it be that the Marvel Universe and the Star Wars universe are going to merge? The Skywalker family joining the Avengers, fighting side by side with Cap and Iron Man? Oh, my. Obviously, Duke was doing this for publicity and to stir up discussion, not just for Star Wars, The Force Awakens. Avengers, Age of Ultron, directed by Joe and Anthony Russo, was scheduled to be released the following May, and this was also serving as advance promotion for that film. Undoubtedly, beginning with Marvel's Phase 2, Captain America Steve Rogers had become extraordinarily important, with many upcoming films planned around him. Thus, Duke's personal bio on Instant Share became somewhat unusual. Under each of his posts, there appeared a special tag. He is regarded as a symbol of the American spirit. His strength, speed, and endurance far exceed those of ordinary people. He earned great military achievements for America and the world during World War II. He was granted a shield of alloy as unbreakable as his will by the government. He has led the Avengers through countless battles, winning victory after victory. He was not born a hero, nor does he possess an indestructible body of iron. He is simply stronger, braver, and wiser than most. He risks his life for the people, sacrifices everything for freedom, and believes that as long as everyone stands together, no enemy is unbeatable. He is Captain America, Steve Rogers. While the North American promotion was already blazing hot, Duke did not relax the push for Star Wars, The Force Awakens in the Chinese market. Although the release across the Pacific would be more than half a month later than the global premiere, in some ways, that was actually beneficial. After all, follow-the-trend viewing was not unique to North America or the Western world. It existed just as much across the Pacific. Tina, aboard the private jet flying to New York for press events, Duke closed the file in front of him and said seriously, "Tell Warner Brothers and Phil, the head of Warner Greater China, that I disagree with this plan." Sitting opposite him, Tina Fey nodded and immediately opened her laptop to send the email. 99.9% of Hollywood directors have no say during a film's marketing and distribution process, but Duke was, of course, an exception. As long as he strongly objected, Warner Brothers and its Greater China branch would definitely not proceed. What Duke opposed was actually quite simple. Phil, the head of Warner Greater China, had suggested that when Star Wars, The Force Awakens was released in China, it should adopt the same covert box office buying tactics commonly used by many top-selling Chinese films during their opening week, so that the box office numbers would appear dazzling, thereby attracting more casual moviegoers. In China's film market, this was indeed an effective marketing and distribution strategy. Duke was not the kind of man obsessed with moral purity. If a certain shady method could significantly boost a movie's commercial success, he usually wouldn't mind using it. The problem was, such a strategy might suit domestic films across the Pacific, but it was absolutely unsuitable for a Hollywood production entering as a foreign competitor. Such things could never be kept completely secret. Once exposed, the media and film companies across the Pacific would unite against them, turning it into a scandal that everyone would condemn. Simply put, this strategy was only suitable for local films, not outsiders. Local film crews and production companies, though fierce competitors, were still closely interconnected. Even if such tactics were exposed, no one would pursue them relentlessly, because most domestic blockbuster films did the same thing. If you exposed someone else today, the same treatment would fall upon you next time. But when it came to Hollywood films, they naturally had no such scruples. The release period of Star Wars, The Force Awakens, was not ideal. Duke knew that very well. First, December was the so-called domestic protection month that the other side of the Pacific never admitted existed, but in reality always did. Second, Duke and Lucasfilm had rejected the investment proposal from the China Film Group. Unless Duke and the executives of Lucasfilm had completely lost their minds, they would never accept external investment for a Star Wars project, not even if it only involved a share of the box office. While Tina Fey quietly typed her email, Duke was still thinking about the matter. Judging from the experiences of his former self in those final years, the other side of the Pacific was undoubtedly in an era when such marketing tactics were widespread. It wasn't entirely Phil's fault, the head of Warner Greater China, for coming up with such a dubious idea. When everyone else did it, and you didn't, you would obviously fall behind. Duke couldn't help but recall the final year of his former self's life. He vaguely remembered it was a Saturday when the third installment of a certain film about Bruce Lee's master was released, putting on what might have been the most spectacular distribution performance in Chinese film history. He, along with everyone else in the industry, had the privilege of witnessing that day, one that might be recorded in history. Late that night, in theaters showing the film, several auditoriums had their front 2 rows completely sold out, even though the middle rows, clearly the best seats, had hardly any tickets sold. And the late-night tickets, which were usually discounted, astonishingly cost 111 and 203 yuan. Anyone who had ever been to a cinema knew that the front 2 rows were the worst seats for watching a movie. Yet somehow, they were almost entirely purchased, and in several theaters where ticket prices exceeded 100 yuan. Even though better seats in the middle were still available, such an abnormal buying spree of poorly positioned seats could only mean these audience members were doing a good deed. And that wasn't all. Soon afterward, in even more theaters, all morning show tickets on Monday were reportedly sold out in advance. And that was a weekday. If 1 or 2 auditoriums had this situation, it might be explained as coincidence. But what if so many theaters suddenly experienced it at the same time? That weekend could truly be called a miracle. Naturally, such circumstances could not escape the notice of sharp-eyed observers. Numerous voices of protest appeared online, and the big scissors summoned the film's related companies and responsible parties for questioning. Yet, when the punishment finally came down, it was light as a feather. The official explanation claimed that this was merely the individual behavior of certain cinemas trying to secure third-party ticket subsidies. Whether it was truly an individual act, no one could say. Perhaps only insiders really knew the truth. Duke, however, understood that the fact domestic films across the Pacific could use such tactics did not mean Warner Brothers or Star Wars. The Force Awakens could do the same. In fact, such methods, the investigation by the big scissors, and the almost meaningless penalties were all quite normal. Every region and market practiced some degree of local protectionism. Even North America, which claimed to be the most open, was no exception. If you knew local protection existed and still insisted on crashing headfirst into it, that was nothing short of courting death. Indeed, according to the data sent by Warner Greater China, the domestic box office manipulation across the Pacific had already become utterly insane. Some well-known directors had even said, "Is there any domestic film nowadays that can gross over 100 million yuan in a single day without buying at least 50 million yuan worth of tickets on opening day?" Chapter 933, Exclusive News. Chapter 933, Chapter 933, Exclusive News. In fact, within the film industry across the Pacific, buying the box office was no longer a secret. Those involved in booking out theaters and boosting box office numbers were not limited to the production companies, cinemas, advertising partners, and even the e-commerce platforms that directly sold movie tickets might all take part in it, each taking a slice of the profit. Box office inflation had long become a common marketing tactic in film promotion. The falsification rate of opening day and opening weekend box office numbers often exceeded 50%, the purpose being to lure audiences into theaters. The process of inflating box office numbers to attract real audiences had been regarded by many film distributors across the Pacific as an unshakable truth. It had become fashionable for both big and small films to launch satellites with their exaggerated box office claims, making it nearly impossible to tell truth from falsehood. Distributors dared to boast recklessly because the taxes and revenue shares from box office earnings were not calculated based on these publicized numbers, but on a separate set of official data. Bragging did not incur taxes, nor did it bring any punishment, which encouraged distributors to boldly falsify box office reports. By spending a certain amount of money to buy out numerous screenings, the production side could first secure a high box office base, present impressive numbers in public reports, and use the publicity to attract many casual viewers. Second, they could occupy more showtimes, which meant that competing films released in the same period would be squeezed out. From a long-term perspective, distributors would also inflate box office numbers in order to elevate their company's reputation and reach first-tier status. Since most distributors were publicly listed companies, this could also help boost their stock prices. As for the theaters, they could save on operational costs, earning revenue without worrying about having empty seats. It was worth noting that quite a few production companies and distributors were one and the same. For example, the company that created that so-called monster-hunting box office miracle. These companies even owned theater chains, effectively achieving an integrated system of production, distribution, and exhibition, a form of self-sufficiency and industry monopoly in essence. Back in his previous life, during his final year, an insider had once revealed to Duke that sometimes even a film's commercial partners would voluntarily book massive numbers of screenings. For instance, during the release of Switch, Audi had booked 300 screenings per day, spending between 300,000 to 500,000 yuan daily, forcibly pushing the film's box office beyond 300 million yuan. Another case was a communications company represented by a certain music superstar, which booked tens of millions worth of screenings for a film he starred in. Advertisers working with the film often booked showings to invite guests as part of their own marketing, essentially using the film to advertise their related products. After the rise of e-commerce, the industry also saw the emergence of a new form, e-commerce bulk booking. For films with strong market prospects, e-commerce platforms sought exclusive partnerships and would often spend tens of millions of yuan up front to secure showtimes, later reselling those tickets to audiences at discounted prices. This low-price strategy helped cultivate user habits for the e-commerce platforms, and in the process, they could also expand their channels, influence, and market share. Of course, Duke knew well that such practices were not unique to the film market across the Pacific. The North American market also had its share of similar phenomena. When it came to profit, capital would employ any commercial tactic imaginable. Like every other business circle, the film industry was far from a pure and virtuous world. The difference, however, was that North America's regulations were comparatively stricter, whereas across the Pacific, both the film market and its supervision mechanisms were still in their infancy. The current scale of box office manipulation across the Pacific was closely related to the lack of regulation. For companies that falsified numbers, the supervisory bodies had no effective countermeasures for the time being. The final reported box office figures largely depended on the production company's own self-discipline, with no truly binding oversight. Even by the time Duke had left that world, this situation had not improved in the slightest. There was nothing Duke could do about it. All he could do was make sure that his own films acted cautiously in this regard, avoiding the minefield altogether. After arriving in New York, Duke only rested at home for one night, had dinner with his mother, and then rejoined the crew, who had already arrived, to participate in the intense promotional campaign. Compared to earlier promotions, after the film's explosive opening, most of the media attention had shifted toward the two new rising stars, Daisy Ridley and Daniel Wu, because every journalist knew that these two had now skyrocketed to fame like rockets launched into space. At the promotional event in the Waldorf Astoria Hotel, Duke remained almost entirely in the background, while the crew focused the spotlight on Daisy Ridley and Daniel Wu. They had even arranged for the New York Times to interview both of them on site. Their sudden popularity was entirely expected. With the help of their professional agents and public relations managers, both young actors handled the interview with perfect balance, giving just enough to attract attention, yet revealing nothing unnecessary. When a New York Times reporter asked, "Rey is an amazing character, combining traits of Princess Leia and Han Solo. Where did your inspiration come from?" Daisy Ridley answered, "I didn't act like that. I just played my own role. As for inspiration, I didn't think about other characters. I simply acted as I should. This is a new character. She may share qualities with others, but she isn't anyone else. Thinking too much about those things would only affect my performance, so I just played Rey." Sitting not far from Daisy Ridley, Duke listened attentively and nodded slightly. She was undoubtedly a very smart actress, possessing a maturity and composure rare for her age. Clearly, the sudden fame hadn't gone to her head. Her words not only promoted the film and the role, but also highlighted her individuality and distinct personality. In her, Duke faintly saw a reflection of a young Natalie Portman. Thinking of that, Duke couldn't help but smile wryly. His former idol had indeed influenced his casting decisions. Then the voice of the New York Times reporter addressing Daniel Wu came through. After you got the role through auditions, was it difficult to keep it a secret for a while? Yes. When I got the part, I wanted to tell the whole world. Like Daisy Ridley, Daniel Wu's agent had joined ICM once he passed the audition. The response was crafted by ICM's professionals. I did tell a taxi driver, but I don't think he believed me. He just said, "Okay, man." So after keeping quiet for so long, being able to finally announce that I got the role felt really cool. I'd been holding it in for too long. The reporter continued, "What's your impression of Duke? Has anything changed since your first meeting and working together?" The first time I met him was a few years ago in Las Vegas. He told me he really wanted to work with me and was looking for a suitable role. Daniel Wu laughed. From then until now, we've managed to keep that natural connection from the audition. Even though it was an audition and there were other actors there, I couldn't feel their presence. Because at that moment, it was just me and Duke creating a character together and presenting it to everyone. They thought it worked, and I was chosen. The result turned out great. The reporter asked both of them, "Did you ever have a moment on set when you suddenly turned into a fan?" Daniel Wu made a please gesture, and Daisy Ridley answered first, "Yes." I was totally amazed. "Oh my God, I actually joined Duke Rosenberg's crew, and I actually met Duke Rosenberg in person. He's the director I admire the most. I had so many questions I wanted to ask him, but I had a job to do, so I couldn't. You can't just indulge yourself, otherwise you'll end up looking." She laughed, and Daniel Wu continued, "That only applies to you, Daisy. I had a great time on set. I worked hard, but once filming wrapped, my inner geek totally exploded. The Millennium Falcon, the lightsaber, I even brought my own figurines for Duke to sign. I really squeezed every drop of benefit out of this opportunity." Listening to the entire interview, Duke was quite satisfied with their performance. Moreover, the reporter, who had been briefed in advance, followed the plan perfectly and asked, "Do you think there will be more background stories revealed about Rey and Finn?" Daisy Ridley nodded first. "Yes." Daniel Wu gave a more detailed response. "Absolutely. There's one thing that really surprised me. How interested the audience is in the stories of these two main characters. They want to know more, but honestly, we don't know any more than you do. I actually want to talk to Duke and Lucasfilm about it. Since we're playing these roles, it feels strange not to know their backstories." He added jokingly, "We have to know where these characters came from. We definitely need to know Luke's stance. It would be really interesting. I'll let you in on a little secret." Daniel Wu deliberately lowered his voice. "I think Rey is Chewbacca's distant cousin. That's an exclusive scoop." Daisy Ridley immediately joined in. "I've heard some rumors about that too." Then the two of them burst out laughing together. The interview ended smoothly. The reporter stood up, packed up equipment with the cameraman, and prepared to leave. Daisy Ridley and Daniel Wu walked off toward their respective agents. The smiles on their faces were gone. There was no conversation, not even eye contact. It was as if they were complete strangers. To be precise, they were simply people connected through work. Neither Duke, nor anyone else from the crew, nor even the reporter, found this surprising. This was simply the norm in Hollywood. While there were cases where lead actors or directors became friends, or even couples, after working together, those were exceptions rather than the rule. In this industry, most of the time, work relationships were just work relationships. As long as it didn't interfere with production, Duke and the crew wouldn't intervene in the actors' private lives. Of course, if Daisy Ridley and Daniel Wu ever did fall for each other, Duke would definitely step in, since that could create negative publicity. After the first weekend passed, the promotional campaign for Star Wars, The Force Awakens remained in full swing. Neither Duke, Lucasfilm, nor distributor Warner Brothers wanted to see the film's weekday box office plummet. Chapter 934, Billion in 7 days. Chapter 934, Billion in 7 days. After entering the new week, Star Wars, The Force Awakens began its weekday run, while North America welcomed Christmas week. It's no exaggeration to say that after its North American opening weekend, Star Wars, The Force Awakens grew stronger by the day, shattering various box office records and sweeping in profits as if entering an unguarded land. The nationwide Monday single-day box office record, which had been sealed for 12 years, was broken once again. Star Wars: The Force Awakens earned $65.24 million on Monday, surpassing the $45.67 million record set by The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King in 2003, raising the bar by a wide margin. In just 4 days, the film's North American box office surpassed $400 million, becoming the fastest movie in North American history to reach that milestone. Meanwhile, Duke, Warner Brothers, and Lucasfilm did not relax their efforts on The Force Awakens. A variety of related activities and promotions continued to emerge endlessly. The record-breaking pace of The Force Awakens showed no sign of slowing, exciting both old and new fans alike. But what about the astronauts on the International Space Station, hundreds of thousands of miles from any theater? How could they watch the movie? Don't worry. That Tuesday, a team of 3 astronauts successfully docked their Soyuz spacecraft with the International Space Station. Their mission went smoothly, and there was a surprise waiting for them in space. Star Wars: The Force Awakens would be screened aboard the station, allowing the astronauts to enjoy a cinematic feast during their Christmas downtime. Watching Star Wars in space is truly an unparalleled experience, an immersive feeling that IMAX can never compare to. The astronauts in orbit could hardly hide their excitement, and NASA shared their transmitted messages on its official instant sharing platform. On Tuesday, The Force Awakens grossed another $53.41 million, effortlessly setting a new record for the highest Tuesday box office in North American history. At this point, Star Wars: The Force Awakens had already broken every possible record there was to break. On Wednesday, North America's well-known online ticketing site Fandango released its list of the 10 highest-selling films of 2014. The Force Awakens claimed the top spot, with over 60% of the site's users purchasing tickets for it, breaking multiple records in the process. Star Wars: The Force Awakens had launched its pre-sale campaign 2 months before release. On Fandango, its first-day pre-sale numbers set a new site record, tripling the previous record held by The Avengers. According to MovieTickets.com, the film's pre-sale box office hit a 15-year high, 13 times that of Star Wars: Episode III, Revenge of the Sith during the same period. IMAX theater sales were equally astonishing. 490 IMAX screens generated over $12.5 million in pre-sale revenue, completely rewriting history, as no film before had ever surpassed $1 million in IMAX single-day pre-sales. That same day, The Force Awakens earned another $42.26 million in North America. By then, the film's North American total had reached $505.42 million, breaking the $500 million mark in just 6 days and setting a new record for the fastest film to do so, surpassing The Avengers. On Thursday, analysts from Oppenheimer and Company stated that the success of Star Wars: The Force Awakens merchandise would drive the U.S. toy and film merchandise industries into their best period in a decade. They estimated that from early November to late December, Star Wars-related product sales had already reached $2 billion. Many benefited from this massive industrial chain: retailers, toy manufacturers, and especially Duke and Lucasfilm. Among the many toy producers of The Force Awakens, an obscure robot toy design company named Sphero caught a huge wave, becoming one of the main contributors to that $2 billion in sales. The company specifically produced miniature BB-8 toys for Duke and Lucasfilm. Duke's choice of such an unknown manufacturer was deliberate. Sphero had long specialized in remote-controlled smart spheres, making it the perfect fit for BB-8. Sphero's own smart balls had been selling for 4 years, at only 14 units per hour. But once the smart ball became BB-8, hourly sales skyrocketed to 4,000 units. That's the power of Duke and Star Wars. With Christmas approaching, BB-8 became the hottest holiday gift. In sales statistics released by multiple e-commerce platforms and department stores, BB-8 related merchandise ranked firmly at the top. Especially on the Thursday before Christmas, in North America alone, BB-8 toy sales reached an astonishing $220 million. That same day, The Force Awakens continued its steady box office performance, grossing $37.56 million and bringing its North American total to $542.98 million. Over those 5 weekdays, The Force Awakens continued its rampage through overseas markets as well, with international box office revenue surpassing $500 million. After 1 week of release, the film's global total reached $1.09758 billion, making it the fastest movie in world history to cross the $1 billion mark. As Star Wars: The Force Awakens approached its second North American weekend, Warner Brothers and Lucasfilm intensified the marketing push. From print media to online social networks, a flood of news stories emerged, but this time, the spotlight shifted toward Duke himself. Every piece of news has a shelf life, and Warner Brothers and Lucasfilm had crafted an exceptionally professional publicity strategy. Notably, on the day before Christmas, Time magazine released its Christmas special issue, with Duke holding hands with BB-8, both appearing together on the cover. As the director of Star Wars: The Force Awakens, Duke Rosenberg possesses the qualities of a god, or the founder of an empire. He is exactly what the long-dormant Star Wars series needed: a superfan of Star Wars and an expert in pop culture. Opening the issue revealed a more detailed feature article. Considering that fans have supported the Star Wars saga for so long, even after being disappointed by a disastrous sequel. Yes, we mean Attack of the Clones. Why, George, why? They never gave up. So, finding someone among them to direct the new installment seemed only fitting. Duke Rosenberg saw the very first Star Wars in 1977, when he was only 7 years old. Due to family connections, he frequently visited the sets of the next 2 films, deeply influenced by Star Wars culture and George Lucas himself. You could say Duke Rosenberg is God's chosen one, blessed in every way, witnessing firsthand the birth of one of the greatest film series in history during his youth. At its peak, the Star Wars universe opened gateways to new worlds and visions, offering audiences the ecstatic wonder of glimpsing marvels both earthly and galactic. Yet, in that same universe, visual effects and anonymity began to outweigh story, character, directorial vision, and creative intelligence. The prequel trilogy's repetitive visuals were filled with apocalyptic noise, endless cycles of similar plots, explosions, escapes, and predictably tortured rescues, leaving audiences numb and detached. But Duke Rosenberg, the director shaped by both Star Wars and George Lucas, saved it all. His wisdom in The Force Awakens, and more importantly, his spirit, was in stripping away unnecessary chaos and restoring the saga to its origins. Within the film's vast and complex universe, that was no small feat. Just like in the real world, the intergalactic war continues, and now the roles of Luke, Leia, and Han Solo are carried by a new trio of charismatic and talented actors carefully chosen by Duke: Oscar Isaac, Daniel Wu, and Daisy Ridley taking over the mantle. Duke also made them appear to possess deeper and more multidimensional human qualities. At the same time, Duke Rosenberg also defined the core of the new trilogy, that the new generation's Luke Skywalker is a young woman, Rey, who lives tenaciously in the desert. Played by Daisy Ridley, she possesses Luke's skill set and shares his love for natural fabrics. Star Wars: The Force Awakens presents a complex future world. Duke Rosenberg crafted the film with exceptional brilliance. This film wasn't made just for die-hard Star Wars fans. It was made for everyone. There's no doubt that the Star Wars series is the strongest fan-driven franchise in history. Over the past week, nearly every Star Wars fan flocked to theaters, contributing massive box office numbers while at the same time somewhat consuming part of their enthusiasm. In subsequent screenings, Star Wars: The Force Awakens had to face such a situation. The passion of Star Wars fans was gradually declining, and how high the final box office could climb depended greatly on the number of casual moviegoers. In North America, Star Wars had long become a social and cultural phenomenon, but there were always areas it couldn't fully reach. Compared to North America, overseas box office results were more affected by general audiences. Warner Brothers and Lucasfilm devised post-release marketing strategies, one of which was to use the film's exceptional ratings and audience word of mouth to influence the choices of casual viewers. In its first week, Star Wars: The Force Awakens had already grossed nearly $1.1 billion worldwide. The subsequent developments prove that whether it was the initial debate Dukes sparked around Ray or the post-release promotional campaigns by Warner Brothers and Lucasfilm, both had an enormous impact. As the new weekend curtain rose, Star Wars: The Force Awakens welcomed not only its second weekend but also the Christmas holiday season. Chapter 935, Movies Have Always Been a Business. Chapter 935, Chapter 935, Movies Have Always Been a Business. On Christmas Day, Duke didn't take a break or relax. After spending Christmas Eve with his mother and Scarlett Johansson, he boarded a plane with other members of the crew and left North America, beginning the overseas promotional tour for the film. Meanwhile, Star Wars: The Force Awakens continued its triumphant march in the North American market. On Christmas Day, Star Wars: The Force Awakens earned $59.34 million in North America, breaking the Christmas Day box office record of $24.6 million set by Sherlock Holmes when it premiered in 2009. The dazzling performance of The Force Awakens also pushed the North American box office to a new high. On that Christmas Day, the North American market earned over $100 million, surpassing the $86 million Christmas Day record jointly held by Sherlock Holmes and Avatar in 2009. The 2015 Christmas and three-day weekend box office also seemed likely to break the $260 million record from the same period in 2009, becoming the highest in North American film history. For this overseas promotional tour, Duke specially invited George Lucas. After all, he wasn't the former Walt Disney, and George Lucas gladly agreed. Lucas's presence also brought even more attention to this overseas tour. Although media coverage kept bringing up the Star Wars prequel trilogy, in Duke's mind, George Lucas's position far surpassed that of Martin Scorsese and Francis Ford Coppola. This had nothing to do with family ties. It was because George Lucas could be called the true founder of the modern film industry. The Star Wars series, or rather George Lucas himself, fundamentally pioneered the concept of the modern film franchise. It is widely recognized in Hollywood and the global film industry that Steven Spielberg's Jaws, 1975, opened the era of the summer blockbuster, while the Star Wars saga elevated Hollywood blockbusters to an entirely new level. In the late 1970s, film series were not well regarded in Hollywood. The Planet of the Apes series and the James Bond franchise were among the few successful examples. Yet, with the sudden emergence and spectacular success of Star Wars, everything changed. Hollywood began seriously exploring serialized film projects. To a great extent, the success of the Harry Potter series, Duke's The Lord of the Rings trilogy, and the Marvel films all trace their origins back to George Lucas's groundbreaking creation in 1977. Duke's famous line, "George Lucas is the Edison of cinema," was not an exaggeration, for Lucas also discovered one of the most vital keys to Hollywood's profitability and survival. Beyond creating a beloved film series, George Lucas also pioneered the business model of movie merchandising. Before that, film-related merchandise was limited to t-shirts and a few small souvenirs, with little variety. But the Star Wars series changed everything. It offered products in huge quantity, high quality, and remarkable diversity. Lucas collaborated with toy industry giants like Mattel, Hasbro, and Lego, producing countless Star Wars toys, characters, settings, starships, and more. This marked the beginning of the early 1980s action figure craze, nurturing a massive group of collector fans and giving passionate young audiences, for the first time, the chance to recreate their favorite scenes at home with a Luke Skywalker or Han Solo figure. It's worth noting that in the late 1970s and early 1980s, home theaters didn't even exist yet. Through its merchandise, George Lucas managed to cultivate future fans among the younger generation, even those who hadn't yet seen the films. Many people, especially children, often fell in love with the Star Wars products before ever watching the movies. This clever approach was later adopted by countless films and manufacturers, and it also helped establish the fan base for America's 1980s Saturday morning cartoon phenomenon. Series like Transformers, He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, and G.I. Joe are all examples where toy sales outperformed the shows themselves. Even now, Duke still remembers that back in the 1980s, when he was in school, the most popular playground game in America suddenly shifted from cops and robbers to rebels versus Imperial soldiers. Everywhere, kids were swinging lightsabers and laser guns. As video games rose to prominence, the Star Wars franchise expanded into gaming as well, offering street corner youths a chance to embark on interactive interstellar adventures. In fact, up to this very day, the entire Star Wars franchise, including its films, video games, toys, and other products, has generated more than $30 billion in global revenue. It takes time for fans to deeply integrate Star Wars culture into their own lives, but Lucasfilm has possessed this unique skill since its very inception. This is what sets it apart from those other companies that constantly hide behind legal documents, forbidding this or restricting that. Thus, the Star Wars fanbase has continued to grow quietly but steadily. As the children grew up, they became die-hard fans themselves. Now, there are already 3 generations of Star Wars fans, and if you think about that carefully, it's quite astonishing. At the first stop of the overseas promotional tour in London, a journalist asked Duke about his opinion on George Lucas establishing such a vast commercial empire through the original Star Wars. "The first thing that comes to my mind," Duke replied, "is that when the original Star Wars came out, Hollywood didn't even have a merchandising industry. Indeed, Hollywood at that time had no concept of an industrial chain." Duke's words were simply stating facts. "I believe that George securing the merchandising rights for the Star Wars series was the single most crucial step in the entire history of the Star Wars franchise." After a brief pause for thought, he added, "Movies have always been a business, but few films have ever achieved what Star Wars did in this regard." When the first Star Wars was released, the world had not yet seen these billion-dollar-level merchandise industries. There was only the Star Wars story itself. But it was precisely on the foundation of those ideas, such as all minds and life being bound and connected by the Force, the eternal struggle between good and evil, and the notion that a farm boy from some remote, unknown place could become the key figure in resisting nearly insurmountable darkness, that the vast Star Wars commercial empire was built. Fans influenced by Star Wars to choose their own career paths were not limited to film directors like Duke. Many of those who grew up watching the original trilogy went on to work for NASA or in the aerospace industry. For example, NASA astronaut Kjell Lindgren also accepted the crew's invitation to attend the Star Wars promotional event in London, and during an interview, he said, "I think Star Wars by itself is imaginative enough just in terms of storytelling. Plus, the high-tech elements and the idea of working and living in outer space are incredibly inspiring. Our generation of astronauts all watched A New Hope, The Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi as kids. Personally, Star Wars is one of the many reasons why I became interested in space exploration." During a program on Sky TV, Duke said, "Star Wars has retained its charm over 40 years, and if I had to sum it up with one word, it would be legendary. Like Greek mythology, Western folklore, or the works of Shakespeare, these stories have withstood the test of time and continue to captivate new generations of audiences. One of the most appealing aspects of The Force Awakens is that parents can take their children to the theater and lead them into this unique universe, just as our parents did for us many years ago when we were kids." Of course, not everyone would praise the movie. No matter how powerful the combination of Duke and Star Wars was, it could not conquer the entire world. On the internet, there were still plenty of people who refused to buy into Duke or Star Wars. There are 2 universally recognized deceivers in this world: fame and profit. And beyond them, there is another important deceiver: fashion. Undoubtedly, Star Wars: The Force Awakens has set this year's end-of-year trend. But such blockbusters are often total artistic failures, utterly vulgar commercial films crafted by Duke Rosenberg purely for money and profit. The reason movies like this can dominate the box office and sweep through the Christmas season isn't because of any artistic achievement we can be proud of, but because of sensory stimulation, stimulation for the eyes, stimulation for the nerves, and stimulation for the endocrine system. Our society cannot stay this vulgar forever. People will one day crave elegant art that awakens their numb minds. Even if the utterly commercialized Duke Rosenberg can dominate the box office now, he will inevitably be abandoned by audiences in the near future. Filmmakers represented by Duke Rosenberg have already forgotten cinema's original purpose and mission. They are increasingly betraying the essence of film itself, pushing movies further and further away from real life. Even so, the crew's overseas promotional tour was still welcomed in every city. Not to mention anything else, the hundreds of reporters flocking to each event were already the best kind of publicity. In addition, many wealthy and leisure-loving fans had followed the crew ever since the Los Angeles premiere. They were exactly the kind of customers businesses love to see. Wherever they went, the Star Wars, The Force Awakens crew became the center of attention. Each promotional stop was like a full-scale campaign. Being surrounded and chased by thousands of people became routine. Many times, after signing so many autographs that their right hands went numb, they had to switch to their left. Fortunately, it was only for autographs. Otherwise, they surely would have embarrassed themselves. On December X, the Star Wars, The Force Awakens crew held an event in XX City. When Duke Rosenberg and the cast appeared, the entire city erupted into chaos and excitement. News like this, which at first could still attract public attention, eventually became routine. In everyone's eyes, it was perfectly normal for Duke's crew to be welcomed everywhere. If they were ever received coldly, that would be the real news. All of Europe was shaken by the promotional tour led by Duke and his team. Those artsy filmmakers, especially the European directors who prided themselves on making pure art, were, of course, unwilling to accept it. They dismissed the film as nothing more than a vulgar story paired with computer-generated visuals, stripped of the authentic charm of cinema. Such sour remarks, however, weren't even believed by European audiences, and North American media couldn't be bothered to respond at all. As for the film and its ordinary fans, those comments carried almost no weight. Star Wars: The Force Awakens unsurprisingly retained its crown as the weekend box office champion in both North America and across the globe. Chapter 936, The King of North America. Chapter 936, The King of North America. On the final weekend of 2014, 5 large-scale new releases joined the fierce North American Christmas box office battle. However, compared with the unstoppable momentum of Star Wars: The Force Awakens, these films were nothing more than dim candlelight before the blazing sun. None of the new releases could slow down The Force Awakens from breaking even more records. Although it had already been in theaters for a week, the film still achieved astonishing numbers. After breaking Sherlock Holmes' 2009 Christmas Day record of $24.6 million with $59.34 million on Friday, The Force Awakens went on to collect $68.92 million on Saturday and $58.17 million on Sunday. Its second weekend box office in North America totaled a staggering $186.43 million, effortlessly smashing the previous record of $111.77 million set by The Avengers, lifting the bar 2 whole levels higher. In fact, except for films directed by Duke himself, such as The Dark Knight and The Avengers, there was no other non-Duke Rosenberg production in the world whose opening weekend North American box office could even compare to The Force Awakens' second weekend. Before Duke Rosenberg, there is only himself left. Many media outlets in North America and Europe impatiently published headlines like this. 10 days after its release, Star Wars: The Force Awakens had already reached $729.41 million in North American gross, surpassing The Avengers' final total of $725.86 million, and standing proudly at second place on the all-time North American box office chart. The reigning champion, Avatar, stood at $749.76 million, but it was now inevitable that The Force Awakens would surpass it. The only remaining suspense was whether the film could achieve the same on the global box office chart. During the same week, including the 3-day weekend, the film expanded into more countries and regions. Even though it had not yet opened in China, the world's second-largest film market, it still earned another $385.2 million from overseas markets, pushing its global box office total to an astonishing $1.66921 billion. Undoubtedly, this marked the fastest any film in history had ever reached the $1.5 billion mark since the birth of cinema as a cultural commodity. In the following week, with the New Year holidays approaching, The Force Awakens' box office trend remained extremely strong, and the film lived up to all expectations. Even on the weekday Monday, Its revenue only dropped by 25% from the previous Sunday, earning $43.63 million. This figure ensured that the film's North American total climbed to $773.03 million, surpassing Avatar's $749.76 million, thus claiming the #1 position on the all-time North American box office chart. A new king of North America is born. Will the king of the world be replaced next? This became the front-page headline of numerous North American media outlets on Tuesday. The craze sparked by Star Wars, The Force Awakens had long transcended cinema. It had become a full-fledged social and cultural phenomenon. Compared with other publications, The Hollywood Reporter, which focused more closely on the industry's movements, pointed out, within the next 2 to 3 months, Duke Rosenberg will become the first director in history whose single film surpasses $1 billion in North American box office. No one disputed this claim. Duke himself also knew well that The Force Awakens' North American performance would not be an issue. The key now was its global revenue. Only by maximizing overseas market performance could the film quickly push past the $2 billion milestone. After all, North America's population was limited. The United States and Canada combined had a total of just over 350 million people. Even including immigrants and ticket-buying illegal residents, the market could not exceed 400 million. A $1 billion box office was nearly the ceiling. It was impossible for every North American to love Duke and The Force Awakens. No film could ever achieve such a feat. Thus, Duke led the crew out of North America and began an international tour across Europe and other major markets. They tried every possible way to capture attention and public interest, motivating audiences to buy tickets and enter theaters. Mainstream media in every country were filled with reports and features related to Star Wars, The Force Awakens. Star Wars, The Force Awakens, and its director Duke Rosenberg are challenging records. The film has become the #1 box office hit in every distribution country, gradually forming a unique phenomenon. Parents taking children to watch it, younger generations bringing their elders. It has become a cross-generational experience. The movie breaks barriers of language, culture, and religion, sparking a global wave of movie-going enthusiasm that shows no signs of slowing. Sitting casually on the subway, one can hear people around discussing the film, talking about BB-8, the Millennium Falcon, and Jedi Knights, or debating Duke Rosenberg's possible designs for the heroine Rey's origins. During the transition from 2014 to 2015, Duke, Kathleen Kennedy, and Charles Roven, together with the crew, spent nearly all their time traveling by air for promotional events. Starting from London, the first stop of their European tour, they visited major cities including Dublin, Paris, Berlin, Milan, and Madrid. Everywhere they went, they ignited unprecedented fervor. The influence of Star Wars, The Force Awakens had long surpassed the scope of film itself. It had evolved into a cultural and even societal phenomenon. Despite the envy and resentment of some European directors who used every means to criticize The Force Awakens as lacking any artistic value, claiming it was nothing but advanced CGI technology and overly sentimental melodrama, the film's march forward could not be stopped. Their opinions held no sway over mainstream audiences. What kind of movies do most people love? The answer was obvious without even asking. Even the mainstream European media, when faced with endlessly lengthening ticket lines and increasingly terrifying box office numbers, had no choice but to offer words of praise, whether they liked it or not. Especially Fleet Street, those journalists who would do anything to grab attention cared little whether they were exalting or tearing down a person. Duke Rosenberg, the #1 director in Hollywood, the leader of global pop culture. To cater to public opinion and attract massive attention, Fleet Street spared no effort in showering Duke with extravagant praise. Bold and enlarged front-page headlines, accompanied by striking photos of the Force Awakens promotion in London, made for an eye-catching display. Even though 2015 has only just begun, we can already confirm no one is more influential than Duke Rosenberg. Wherever he appears becomes the focal point and center of the world. Every word he says, every move he makes, easily captures the public's gaze and dominates the front pages of major media outlets. Everyone already knows how brilliant he is, But who could have imagined that after the globally sensational Batman trilogy and the Avengers, he would team up with the Star Wars series to bring the world such an enormous surprise? Although he doesn't hold British citizenship, Duke Rosenberg has made tremendous contributions to global cultural exchange. The royal family should consider granting him the honor he deserves. Although the entire article was filled with the typical British sense of self-importance, it was nonetheless unreserved in its praise of Duke. Of course, in the eyes of Duke's fans, all of this was nothing more than the simple truth. As the crew traveled across major cities, they received treatment that even the world's top political leaders could hardly hope for. When arriving at airports, there were always thousands, sometimes tens of thousands, of fans who gathered spontaneously to welcome them. Whenever a fan meeting was held, the entire city would fall into paralysis, and upon departure, thousands of devoted fans would cry and beg the crew to stay longer. Among them, Duke was the most popular figure. Countless Duke fans came solely for him. Since the birth of cinema, no director had ever built a level of commercial influence stronger than that of Hollywood's greatest superstars until Duke. Furthermore, led by the North American media and Fleet Street, hundreds of journalists followed the crew wherever they went. Even when Duke and the others left the center of the entertainment world for the Far East, these reporters remained relentless, swearing to dig up every detail of the crew's private lives. In fact, after arriving at a hotel in Hong Kong, a female paparazzo from The Sun bribed a maid and almost managed to sneak into Daisy Ridley's room. Incidents like this happened repeatedly throughout the entire promotional campaign. To ensure safety and privacy, Lucasfilm specifically hired a highly professional security team to accompany The Force Awakens crew throughout the journey. Hollywood's most influential superdirector in the Far East. Star Wars: The Force Awakens had already been released in Hong Kong for some time, and the crew's arrival sent the city, recently shaken by unrest, into a frenzy, with media outlets competing to report on it. This is Duke Rosenberg's second visit to Hong Kong. His outstanding works have allowed us to truly understand this young superdirector. His influence has spread to every corner of the world. Perhaps those reports were somewhat exaggerated, but in several Far Eastern regions long influenced by Hollywood culture, Duke Rosenberg's name had been etched deeply into people's hearts through one major blockbuster after another. The uproar caused by the crew across the Far East was no less than that in North America. Cities like Hong Kong, Taipei, Seoul, Tokyo, and Manila were completely conquered by Star Wars: The Force Awakens. When the crew left Tokyo to head for Sydney, a few female fans who learned the news tried to stop Daniel Wu from leaving and, in a shocking scene, slit their wrists in public, an act both tragic and absurd. More than 10 days later, after a long and exhausting journey, the weary crew finally arrived at the last stop of their global promotional tour and the only major market where Star Wars: The Force Awakens had yet to be released, China. Although China's traditional New Year and New Year's Day film seasons had just ended, which normally would mean a cooling-off period for the market, Duke and his team's arrival still triggered a massive wave of excitement. Chapter 937, China Premiere. Chapter 937, Chapter 937, China Premiere. After waiting for 1 month and 9 more days, the so-called bad film season finally ended, and at last, we can go to the cinema again. On a well-known movie forum of the Greater China Network, a fan wrote such a comment. For many movie lovers, December and the New Year holidays are usually an excellent time to watch films, but during that period, they rarely step into theaters. Even if they do, they seldom buy tickets. Someone on the website called out, Star Wars: The Force Awakens is finally going to be released. Duke's fans, what are you waiting for? See you tomorrow at the Shanghai International Cinema for the China premiere. Since Star Wars: The Force Awakens began its theatrical run in North America and overseas, Warner Bros. Greater China had never relaxed its promotional efforts in the Chinese market. The film had been in release for 20 days in North America, grossing $979.88 million, just a hair away from the $1 billion mark. Worldwide box office had also, unsurprisingly, surpassed the $2 billion milestone, reaching a total of $2.21588 billion. Such figures not only gave Warner Bros. Greater China strong confidence, but also made the China Film Group, responsible for domestic distribution, see enormous profit potential. They raised the film's release classification to the highest level. Whether from official or private capital, no one would turn away from the high and predictable returns. Although Star Wars: The Force Awakens was released in China 20 full days later than elsewhere, which naturally meant losing part of the audience, its extraordinary global box office served as the best possible publicity and guaranteed enough attention. As The Force Awakens' global revenue continued to soar, its merchandise had also become red-hot. Duke received the latest statistics. In just 20 days since its release, related merchandise in the U.S. market alone had generated $700 million in sales, far exceeding other Hollywood blockbusters, making it the domestic king of merchandising. Among all products, the intelligent droid BB-8 and the Jedi lightsaber were the most popular. But that wasn't all. Duke and Lucasfilm still had a major secret weapon up their sleeves. Upon arriving in China, Duke also announced through his official Twitter and Instant Share account that merchandise for the female lead Rey, whose products had been withheld due to film secrecy, had now entered production and would be officially launched soon. It was well known that Rey wasn't just the most popular character in The Force Awakens, but also the hottest topic among global fans recently. Once her merchandise hit the market, its sales could easily be imagined. In some sense, this was also a form of hunger marketing. Why do these characters look different from what Tina taught me, and also different from what we saw in Hong Kong? The sun leaned westward. In the car waiting at the pickup area, Scarlett Johansson, who had joined Duke in Hong Kong, sat calmly beside him, holding his arm as she gazed at the banners and signs outside. Curious, she asked, aren't they all Chinese? Why are they so different? It was a question that could take days to explain, so Ryan offered the simplest answer. Chinese writing has two systems, simplified and traditional. What you saw before was traditional Chinese. Here, it's all simplified Chinese. At that moment, someone opened the car door from outside. Duke reminded her, "Darling, it's time to get out." Although the China premiere of Star Wars: The Force Awakens wasn't as grand as the global premiere in Los Angeles, it was still an unprecedentedly large-scale event for any Hollywood film in history. Not to mention the numerous Chinese stars invited by Warner Bros. Greater China and China Film Group. The Hollywood contingent alone was dazzling. Not only were all the main cast and crew of The Force Awakens present, but Duke's close friends and collaborators from the industry, though few, were all high-profile and had flown across the ocean to show support. Despite the passionate enthusiasm of Chinese fans, Duke and Scarlett, as usual, moved swiftly along the red carpet. Plenty of other celebrities awaited the fans' cheers behind them. Leonardo DiCaprio's appearance nearly drove the female fans into hysteria. Without the presence of a sufficient security team, he might not have been able to make it back across the Pacific. When Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman appeared hand in hand, reporters' camera shutters almost cramped from constant clicking, and fans erupted in waves of applause. Then, Charlize Theron, wearing a pale gold fishtail gown, stepped onto the red carpet, and the previously chaotic scene fell into sudden silence. Countless eyes were fixated on her. The Queen Theron aura on the red carpet was powerful enough to silence everything around her. "Thank you all." In front of the Shanghai International Cinema, Duke stepped forward to greet the arriving guests. "Thank you all for coming. Leo, still as charming as ever. Tom, Mary, where's my goddaughter? Sally." Duke embraced each of them warmly, then led Scarlett to pose with them before the media cameras. In that single photo stood one super director, two top-tier male stars, and three A-list actresses. Their combined star power was enough to murder countless cameras with flashes. Leonardo DiCaprio, Tom Cruise, and the couple Nicole Kidman were soon guided by staff toward the guest area, but Charlize Theron stopped in front of Duke, seemingly not even noticing Scarlett Johansson beside him. "My outfit looks great, doesn't it?" Charlize Theron raised an eyebrow and asked, "Don't I look beautiful?" Duke wasn't foolish. He would never compliment another woman in front of his girlfriend. He merely shrugged and said nothing. "Is that a Dior-sponsored gown?" Scarlett Johansson casually muttered with a faint smirk. "That dress really highlights your flat-chested flaw." Charlize Theron slightly turned her head, raising her eyebrows even higher. She was about to fire back, but upon meeting Duke's gaze, she hesitated, shook her head slightly at Scarlett, and then turned away toward the guest area. "I don't like her," Scarlett said softly. Duke patted her hand gently. Come on, we should head to the interview zone. In the interview area, many reporters surrounded Daniel Wu. Having become the male lead of a mainstream Hollywood blockbuster, he had achieved something that neither Bruce Lee nor Jackie Chan ever had, naturally making him the focus of the Chinese media. Appearing on screen with me makes Daisy even more stylish. I'm the one who brought out her best charm, Daniel Wu said with a grin during the interview. Daisy Ridley cooperated perfectly, as required by both her contract and professionalism. Daniel is also one of the best young actors I've ever met. I think there's only one young actor in our crew who performed even better than Daniel. As she spoke, Daisy Ridley reached down to pat the head of the BB-8 droid beside her. Acting with BB-8 was an incredible experience. It's such an amazing character. After spending so much time with it, I almost feel uncomfortable acting with real people now. However, as Duke entered the interview area, most of the reporters immediately shifted their attention toward him. A reporter from the national television movie channel took the lead, asking assertively, Director Rosenberg, since China lacks a deep Star Wars cultural foundation, do you think Chinese audiences will be able to accept Star Wars: The Force Awakens, a sequel like this? Last night, a group of lucky Chinese Star Wars fans and movie lovers, along with invited guests, had already attended the advanced screening of Star Wars: The Force Awakens at the Shanghai International Cinema. Perhaps because the film's box office numbers were so astonishingly high, some members of the local media felt a bit of resentment, which led to this somewhat challenging question. But Duke handled it with complete composure. I also attended last night's advanced screening, and I was truly amazed by how passionate and enthusiastic the atmosphere in the theater was. For promotional reasons, Duke spoke in remarkably fluent Mandarin. I didn't expect there to be so many Star Wars fans in China. They're just as passionate and devoted as the fans in other parts of the world. During the screening last night, the audience's reactions to the story, the laughter, the tears, were completely in sync with what we've seen from audiences in America and other countries. Duke gave the state television reporter a calm and polite smile. Compared to the national television reporter, who carried a certain authoritative aura, the journalist from Penguin Entertainment, a media outlet with close ties to Duke, asked a far more cooperative question. Star Wars: The Force Awakens has been soaring at the global box office, with both commercial success and critical acclaim. This reporter had spoken with Duke before and knew that he could understand these Chinese phrases. Even the American Film Institute extended its voting deadline for last year's top 10 films of the year, just so its members could watch The Force Awakens before casting their votes. The film eventually made it into the final top 10 list. Director Rosenberg, what do you think about that? In response to the American Film Institute's special backdoor treatment, Duke said, the things that have happened over the past few weeks have truly amazed us. Not just that honor, but also breaking the $2 billion global box office mark a few days ago. We certainly had expectations for The Force Awakens, but we never imagined such an overwhelming response. We're deeply grateful and thrilled to see everyone genuinely embrace this new chapter of Star Wars. Since the film was now premiering in China, its connection to the country naturally became a focus for the media. One reporter asked, in Star Wars: The Force Awakens, we saw a Chinese actor, Daniel Wu. Will there be more collaboration with China in the future? After so many years, the Star Wars saga is finally returning to Chinese theaters. Of course, we're incredibly excited about its release in the world's second-largest film market. Faced with such a question, Duke knew exactly how to respond. The spin-off Star Wars, Rogue One, which will be released at the end of next year, just wrapped filming recently. It features 2 Chinese actors, and their performances were absolutely phenomenal. Finally, Duke deliberately added, China has countless legendary stories that have been passed down for thousands of years. Perhaps future Star Wars films will draw inspiration from them. With the film about to open in China, whether the global box office could reach another breakthrough would depend greatly on the performance of the Chinese market. Chapter 938, Billion RMB in 3 days. Chapter 938, Chapter 938, Billion RMB in 3 days. Box office revenue is by no means the only standard for judging the quality of a film. That's beyond dispute. Even Duke, a typical commercial director, cannot deny this fact. However, for film companies, for Duke, and especially for Star Wars, The Force Awakens' box office performance is the only standard of judgment. Particularly in the Chinese market, box office revenue accounts for over 90% of Star Wars income in this region. Indeed, Star Wars merchandise has penetrated almost every corner of the world, but the Chinese market remains an absolute exception. Perhaps in some large and medium-sized cities one can spot Star Wars toys and cultural t-shirts, yet the vast majority are counterfeit products. Duke knew very well that, at this stage, expecting merchandise like BB-8 or Jedi lightsabers, which sell tremendously in North America and other mature movie markets, to flood the Chinese market was simply impossible. Although China's film-related merchandise industry had already achieved a certain scale, for a film like The Force Awakens, its sales could only be described as better than nothing. In the plans of Lucasfilm and Duke, the Star Wars, The Force Awakens project did not aim to profit from China's film merchandise market, but rather to cultivate Chinese consumers' interest in Star Wars and its related products, laying the groundwork for future box office and merchandise sales. Markets need to be cultivated. There's no such thing as a fully mature market that's just starting out. To build this foundation, the first step was to ensure that Chinese audiences would at least go to theaters to watch The Force Awakens. Duke's choice of Daniel Wu, as well as the series of plans developed by Lucasfilm and Warner Brothers, were all extensions of this established strategy. Therefore, the box office became the sole criterion for testing The Force Awakens' success in the Chinese market. The previous Star Wars, The Force Awakens, lacked both the publicity buzz generated by a figure like Daniel Wu and a director as influential in China as Duke. Moreover, Walt Disney's marketing strategy focused too heavily on first-tier cities, directly resulting in strong box office performance in those cities, accounting for nearly 70% of the film's total China revenue, but lukewarm or even disastrous results in lower-tier markets, where both ticket sales and audience reputation collapsed. To avoid repeating this mistake, Duke had long instructed Lucasfilm and Kathleen Kennedy to do extensive groundwork, even going so far as to offer free broadcasting rights for the first 6 Star Wars films to local TV stations and online streaming platforms. According to Duke's expectations, and based on Warner Brothers Greater China's preliminary surveys, Lucasfilm set The Force Awakens' Chinese box office target at 2 billion renminbi. Perhaps Lucasfilm and Warner Brothers had indeed done sufficient preparation, or perhaps Duke's unparalleled influence among global directors played a role, or maybe the prior month's releases, The Crossing and Gone with the Bullets, had ushered in a full month of flops, leaving the market starved for a blockbuster. Whatever the case, all that pent-up potential finally exploded. Thus, on its opening day in China, Star Wars, The Force Awakens gave Duke, Warner Brothers, and Lucasfilm a tremendous surprise. In the mainland Chinese market, The Force Awakens, just as in most other regions of the world, first shattered the midnight screening record with 51 million renminbi, and then, during the day, displayed overwhelming momentum, raking in 340 million renminbi. Including midnight showings and minor statistical discrepancies, the total opening day box office reached 410 million renminbi, far surpassing the previous record of 230 million renminbi, set 2 years earlier by the Avengers. In truth, the so-called midnight showings were not limited strictly to 12 a.m. Since the number of late-night moviegoers was enormous, major chains like Wanda Cinemas scheduled screenings as late as 2:45 a.m., all of which sold out completely. Many viewers didn't leave the theater until after 5 a.m., practically staying up to greet the sunrise. Once the sun rose, The Force Awakens entered full-blown frenzy mode. Cinemas across the nation were packed to bursting. Tickets were nearly impossible to obtain, and anyone wanting good seats had to book several days in advance. By the end of the day, The Force Awakens had pulled in slightly over 400 million renminbi, setting a new all-time record in Chinese film history, and the previous record holder was none other than Duke Rosenberg's The Avengers. The last time, director Duke Rosenberg's The Avengers already gave us the most optimistic outlook on the Chinese film market, said one theater chain executive in an interview, offering unreserved praise. This time, his Star Wars, The Force Awakens, has doubled everyone's imagination of the market's potential. Star Wars, The Force Awakens is minting money by the day. On the film's second day in release, such headlines appeared prominently across nearly all major websites and mainstream media outlets. The astronomical box office success triggered a massive chain reaction. Currently, China has over 25,000 theaters nationwide, with 150,000 screenings daily. Under normal circumstances, a film with a screen share of 50% is already considered a phenomenon-level release. The Crossing had a first-day screen share of 54.2%, and Zhang Xiaojuan's Gone with the Bullets reached 58% last month, both record highs at the time. Such treatment was usually reserved for domestic films, but one rule of capital never changes. Capital never goes against profit. Originally, The Force Awakens' opening day screen share stood at 51%, but its 400 million renminbi debut acted like a shot of adrenaline to both its distributor, China Film Group, and the theater chains nationwide. None of them cared that The Force Awakens was a Hollywood production. They all scrambled to increase the number of screens showing it. By the film's second day in China, its screen share had soared to 71%. The enormous Chinese film market had effectively become a one-film domain ruled by The Force Awakens. Even though the remaining films combined still occupied nearly 30% of showings, of the 380 million renminbi in total nationwide box office that day, The Force Awakens alone contributed 340 million renminbi, accounting for nearly 90%. Sheer madness. After just 2 days of release, Star Wars: The Force Awakens had already grossed over 700 million renminbi in mainland China. The media buzzed with reports, the internet was boiling with discussion, and conversations everywhere revolved around the movie. Within the shortest time, it had created a social phenomenon, making people feel that not watching The Force Awakens meant being outdated, unable even to join in conversations with others. Although such a sentiment inevitably provoked resistance among a small minority, it successfully ignited the curiosity of the mainstream audience. After all, herd mentality wasn't unique to North American viewers. Chinese audiences were no exception. Thus, following its first 2 days' earnings of 400 million renminbi and 340 million renminbi, Star Wars: The Force Awakens maintained its strength on the final day of its first weekend in China, effortlessly breaking the 300 million renminbi barrier and taking in 310 million renminbi. In China, the weekly box office champion is determined by the total revenue of all 7 days. However, The Force Awakens, having amassed an astonishing 1 billion renminbi in just 3 days, had no competitors whatsoever and effortlessly claimed the top spot on China's box office chart. At the same time, Warner Bros. Greater China did not ease up on the film's publicity and marketing efforts in the slightest. Star Wars: The Force Awakens rakes in 1 billion renminbi in 3 days, breaking multiple Chinese box office records. In China's rapidly developing film market, such promotional reports undoubtedly attracted even greater attention from potential audiences, especially casual moviegoers, and successfully drew them into theaters. After The Force Awakens completed its first 3 days of screening, the marketing focus became very straightforward, highlighting the brand-new records it had set in the history of Chinese cinema. 1. Highest midnight screening record, 51.3 million renminbi. 2. Highest single-day gross for a single film, 410 million renminbi. 3. Highest overall single-day national box office, 430 million RMB. 4. Fastest to surpass 100 million renminbi in 8 hours. 5. Fastest to surpass 200 million renminbi in 13 hours. 6. Fastest to surpass 300 million renminbi in 17 hours. 7. Fastest to surpass 400 million renminbi in 23 hours. 8. Fastest to surpass 500 million renminbi in 28 hours. 9. Fastest to surpass 1 billion renminbi in 3 days. Almost every media outlet, under such headlines, mentioned one additional fact. All of these previous records were originally held by Duke Rosenberg's The Avengers. There was no doubt that Duke's influence in this land and this market was far beyond that of any other Hollywood director, even surpassing that of all Hollywood superstars combined. Over the past 20 years, through VHS tapes, DVDs, online downloads, and theatrical releases, he had, with his mainstream and widely appealing filmmaking style, cultivated tens of millions of Chinese Duke fans, along with hundreds of millions more who recognized or had at least heard of his name. These were the most valuable and irreplaceable cinematic resources, and it was precisely their existence that created the unparalleled sensation sparked by Star Wars: The Force Awakens across China. The film's three-day box office had already crushed all Chinese movies except for two, and surpassing those remaining domestic films was merely a matter of the next 2 or 3 days. Just as Hollywood filmmakers dislike seeing foreign films dominate the North American market, Chinese filmmakers likewise would never wish to see their own domestic market completely ruled, even temporarily, by a foreign invader from North America. Chapter 939. An Unpredictable Future Scene. Chapter 939. Chapter 939. An Unpredictable Future Scene. Star Wars: The Force Awakens allowed Chinese filmmakers to see the enormous potential and infinitely bright future of China's film market, while at the same time making them feel the pressure and crisis. At the Directors Guild's commendation ceremony, the famous mainland director Feng Dia stated, "Star Wars: The Force Awakens grossed over 400 million yuan in a single day and surpassed 1 billion in 3 days. Duke Rosenberg truly has no rivals, but domestic films must hold the line." Of course, in China's film market, where the number of screens is still increasing, these records may soon be broken one after another. The true significance and value of so-called box office records is something that varies from person to person. However, it's undeniable that these numbers indirectly reflect the popularity of Star Wars: The Force Awakens in China, and they also allow Duke to continue dominating the top spot of China's all-time box office chart, a position he has held since The Lord of the Rings: The Return of the King. While promoting its success in the Chinese market, Duke also specifically asked Tina Fey to collect some North American media analyses to be placed across Chinese media and the internet, further boosting The Force Awakens discussion and exposure. Star Wars: The Force Awakens has set a benchmark for all film franchises in terms of diversity within its leading cast, featuring Chinese-American actor Daniel Wu and Latino actor Oscar Isaac. This film is also among the few blockbusters of its kind where male dominance is significantly weakened, giving female actors equal opportunities to shine and showcase their talent. This is an important lesson for Hollywood to learn. They not only have a diverse leading cast, but also characters who are rich and full of life, never deliberately pandering. Chinese media reports even quoted a portion of North American data. In North America, 49% of Star Wars: The Force Awakens audience were women. The racial breakdown shows 37% Hispanic, 35% white, 24% Asian, 10% African American, and others making up the remainder. In fact, this was also part of the reason The Force Awakens sold so well in North America. The proportion of non-white audiences exceeded 70%. Against the backdrop of rising Asian and Latino audience ratios, emphasizing diversity proved to be an extremely profitable approach. Every person who entered the cinema to watch Star Wars: The Force Awakens could find a character on screen they could identify with. Duke's deliberate effort to highlight diversity among the leads helped the film gain countless fans across South America and other parts of the world. Similarly, if those predominantly black nations had sufficiently developed economies, Duke would surely have created an African lead as well. Unfortunately, almost all black-dominated countries are synonymous with chaos and poverty. To draw attention during promotion, a film's production company and its people can always create a lot of buzzworthy topics. While Star Wars: The Force Awakens was a box office sensation in China, Duke was busy with local promotional events, and the publicity topics generated in North America were immediately relayed by Warner Brothers across the Pacific, further amplifying the film's halo. This time, the person who spoke up was Stan Lee, and the topic he brought up was an old one, something that had long appeared within Marvel's upper management and on Duke's desk, but this was the first time it was made public. Can Star Wars and the Marvel Universe crossover? Could such a fantastical idea actually happen? This became one of the hottest topics online that week in both North America and China. Now that Lucasfilm and Marvel Studios both belong under Duke's banner, many fans began to speculate whether Duke might one day make the two cinematic universes intersect on screen. During one Marvel promotional event, A North American reporter posed this question to Stan Lee, who responded optimistically. I don't know how many characters can fit into one movie, but if Duke thinks it's doable, he'll definitely find a way to make the two universes cross. Having multiple independent characters appear together in one film is already a Marvel tradition, with the Avengers being the prime example. Stan Lee added, in the Avengers, Duke already united several superheroes into one film. We could include even more characters. Wouldn't it be fun if Luke Skywalker joined the Avengers? If Marvel and Star Wars, two universe-level IPs, were ever to unite, the resulting future would truly be unimaginable. Of course, Stan Lee's comments were made under Duke's direction, serving as a joint promotion for Star Wars, The Force Awakens, and Avengers, Age of Ultron, which was set to release in May. From Duke's own plans, even if such a crossover were to happen, it would take quite a few more years. As for whether it would make sense, that's hardly the point. As long as the profits are high enough, Duke wouldn't care which universe it is. Even Calabash Brothers or Ultraman could be added in, with no concern for exhausting fans' emotional attachment. The marketing campaign for Star Wars, The Force Awakens practically dominated every major space across China's internet and traditional media. Anyone who opened any kind of app that week would be surprised to find The Force Awakens posters occupying every opening splash screen, from Me, Moji Weather, and QQ Zone, to Sina Weibo, Didi, and Kuaiti Taxi. Almost none were spared. On the streets, one could see Star Wars elements everywhere as well, from mall decorations to merchandise displays. And if you happened to pass by the Lu Royal Meridian Shanghai recently, you'd even see two lightsabers standing atop its roof, pointing straight into the sky. At this point, every movie released in China is something Hollywood studios place great expectations upon. With only a limited number of annual import quotas for revenue-sharing films, since Duke and Lucasfilm went to such great lengths to bring the movie into China, they naturally hoped it would make a huge profit. When Star Wars first became popular years ago, China's film market was still very small. Moreover, the Star Wars series itself was quite old, and its sci-fi elements and vast world-building lacked the cultural foundation to resonate with Chinese audiences. As a result, Star Wars had virtually no fan base in China. In previous years, the once famous phrase, "May the Force be with you," meant little to most Chinese audiences. So, what kind of people make up today's Chinese moviegoers? Duke has, over the years, commissioned professional agencies to gather such data. The post-80s and post-90s generations, those who never experienced the Star Wars era, contribute 77% of China's total box office. Just 5 years ago, there was still a massive gap between China's mainstream moviegoers and the Star Wars franchise. Back then, Duke's biggest task for Kathleen Kennedy and Lucasfilm, in coordination with Warner Brothers, was to use all kinds of marketing resources to bridge that gap. At the very least, the variety of marketing efforts needed to spark public curiosity, to make people walk into theaters and experience the baptism of the Force. Thus, Lucasfilm's strategy was to let Star Wars elements dominate every inch of the public's view through all kinds of publicity and merchandise, while leveraging numerous KOLs and fans to generate online buzz. In short, wherever the eyes could see and the ears could hear, it was all Star Wars. All of this had been carefully planned long in advance, starting from the moment Duke acquired Lucasfilm. And the years of relentless effort also became one of the fundamental reasons behind the box office explosion of Star Wars, The Force Awakens in China. In addition, the film's success in China couldn't be separated from the promotional support of its partners. Among the many partners of Duke and Lucasfilm, some were multinational corporations that had maintained long-term collaborations with Duke. For example, Lego, which had always been one of the main manufacturers and distributors of Duke's movie merchandise, and China's Geely, which had been one of the main sponsors ever since the production of Transformers. Whether it was Lego or Geely, they shared one common trait. Both possessed powerful retail networks and the financial strength and capability to execute high-intensity, high-density marketing campaigns. Each was able to provide substantial support for Star Wars, The Force Awakens. Therefore, it was easy to imagine what a grand spectacle it must have been when Star Wars, The Force Awakens was released in China as every brand, in coordination with Lucasfilm and Warner Bros. Greater China's preset release schedule, launched their promotional campaigns simultaneously. Among all the collaborating brands, Geely perhaps carried out the largest-scale promotional campaign for the Chinese release of Star Wars. The dairy company printed images of stormtroopers and BB-8 on its advertisements and placed them virtually everywhere possible, from subway stations, bus stops, newspapers, supermarkets, malls, and convenience stores, to mobile apps, and even WeChat moments. Geely even collaborated with popular Weibo humor accounts and many Chinese celebrities for embedded advertisements. Of course, this was also an excellent promotional opportunity for Geely itself. In terms of distribution channels, this was Geely's most comprehensive campaign to date. Apart from YKZ, which missed the schedule due to timing issues, all of Geely's product lines participated in this collaboration. The attention these ads received was more than 10 times higher than usual. Over the following days, Star Wars: The Force Awakens continued its triumphant run in China, with its daily box office never falling below 100 million renminbi. After a full week in theaters, its cumulative box office in China had already surpassed 1.5 billion renminbi. This also set a new record for the fastest film in Chinese history to surpass 1.5 billion renminbi at the box office. Faced with such a phenomenal box office performance, many Chinese filmmakers also went to theaters to watch it, though quite a few did so with a critical attitude. For instance, Feng Dia publicly stated during an interview that Star Wars: The Force Awakens was extremely boring. After the first 20 minutes, he found it unbearable and chose to leave early. In a way, such criticism was not necessarily a bad thing after all. No promotional campaign can keep hyping the same topic forever. Chapter 940. The highest grossing film in Chinese history. Chapter 940. Chapter 940. The highest grossing film in Chinese history. Who is this person? Inside the moving car, Scarlett Johansson frowned after listening to Tina Fey's translation from the passenger seat. Her delicate face showed a trace of irritation. Our film isn't even in competition with his, right? Then why did he come out and say something like that? Her question, of course, was directed at Duke. Duke gently patted Scarlett's hand and said, "I know a bit about the film industry here. This particular director likes to criticize people or movies. That's why he's earned himself a nickname, Big Cannon." Big Cannon? Since Duke had translated the word directly into English, Scarlett immediately understood its meaning. After thinking for a moment, she couldn't help but smile slightly. That's quite an accurate description. Duke knew what kind of person Feng Big Cannon was. Every time he opened fire, it was for a purpose. Most people knew Feng was an excellent commercial director, but few realized that he was also a master of self-promotion. The most typical example was his frequent declarations about quitting the film industry. He had said it so many times that even he probably couldn't remember how often. Practically every time he had a new film coming out, he would announce that he was about to retire. Of course, Duke didn't mind that Feng was using his movie to stir up hype. After all, even such criticism could be turned into an advantage, something Warner Bros. Greater China could cleverly use to generate a topic effect. The Mercedes van gradually slowed and came to a stop in front of the Crown Plaza Hotel. As the doorman opened the door, Duke's two bodyguards quickly arrived from the following car. They took over the luggage and, following Western custom, gave the doorman a modest tip. Looking up at the Chinese characters on the hotel sign, Scarlett Johansson sighed softly. For a city that isn't even that famous in China, it's still so congested. No sooner had she said that than she coughed a few times, instinctively pinched her nose, and furrowed her brows. Duke turned his head toward the gray, hazy sky. He hadn't forgotten that this city, known for its springs, also carried an indescribable odor in its air. Looking upward, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was blocking the sky. He remembered very clearly that when he had lived here years ago, during this same period of time, this city's air pollution index was almost always ranked among the bottom 3 in the country. Originally, Duke had left the film set and brought Scarlett Johansson here to see what his other homeland looked like. But today's air quality was clearly terrible, not suitable for going outdoors. Cancel the sightseeing plan for now. In the presidential suite, Duke told Tina Fey and Scarlett Johansson, who were unpacking their luggage, "Let's see if the air improves tomorrow." Perhaps it was because she hadn't quite adapted to China yet. Or perhaps the smog really was irritating, but Scarlett kept coughing lightly after going upstairs. Cough, cough. Clenching her fist to her mouth, Scarlett hung Duke's coat on the rack and said, I just don't understand why you wanted to come here. Tina Fey also looked at Duke curiously. She had been to China with Duke many more times than Scarlett, yet she had never seen him show such interest in this particular city. Duke certainly wouldn't reveal the real reason. He simply shook his head slightly. You wouldn't understand. Scarlett walked over, pulling Duke down to sit on the long sofa. Since when did you start liking all this mysterious talk? A few days ago, I read a travel brochure about this city while I was in Shanghai. Seeing Scarlett's puzzled look, Duke casually added, Then I had a dream about coming here to visit. That's your reason? Scarlett shook her head repeatedly. She knew what kind of man Duke was and didn't believe it for a second. You? Influenced by dreams. By then, Tina Fey had finished unpacking and headed toward the study. I'm going to work, she said. Duke nodded. Since arriving in China, his workload hadn't decreased. If anything, it had grown. Many aspects of Lucasfilm's collaborations with Chinese partners required review, and Tina Fey usually handled the preliminary processing before compiling everything for him to finalize. Scarlett handed him a glass of water. Duke drank it and walked to the laptop Tina had set up on the desk. He pressed the power button. As Scarlett poured another glass of water for him, she followed over. You're still working? Our PR campaign involving that big Canon gentleman has already begun. Clicking open the browser, Duke stared at the monitor. I want to see what the online reaction looks like here. Recently, the main promotional angle for Star Wars, The Force Awakens in China had been its record-breaking box office numbers. But such publicity couldn't stay hot forever. Fresh, engaging topics were necessary. Many media outlets were already amplifying Feng's remarks. However, on social media, under the skillful direction of Warner Bros. Greater China's PR team, Chinese audiences and netizens were showing an overwhelmingly one-sided response. Feng Big Cannon had said that Star Wars, The Force Awakens was lively enough, but lacked soul. You've shown me liveliness, he wrote, but I am not satisfied. I seek the human spirit. Whether in film or on stage, one must have heart. That was what Feng later posted on Weibo, and he was immediately bombarded by countless fans and netizens. Of course, many replied, private customization. I walked out before it even finished. More and more sharp comments began appearing online, flooding social media with attacks against Feng. Whether or not director Feng's opinion has merit, the truth is that Chinese film production standards still have a long way to go before catching up to Hollywood. Every country has its own cinematic style, but no one can deny that Hollywood blockbusters are unmatched. China's film industry is technically behind that can be improved with effort, but what we also need to learn is Hollywood's sincerity in filmmaking. Nowadays, Chinese films are often crudely made and overly commercialized, exactly what audiences complain about. Watching one bad movie means being fooled once. Watching another means you're just stupid. Supporting domestic films is fine and commendable, but blind nationalism only spoils our film industry. Chinese cinema has disappointed audiences again and again, becoming more profit-driven each time. If this continues, fewer and fewer people will be willing to pay for tickets. In Duke's view, Chinese cinema could develop in two directions: either establish its own unique style, avoiding repetitive and meaningless imitation, or move toward a more commercial model but with true sincerity. A blockbuster should feel like a blockbuster. Don't use the label of a big film to produce something neither here nor there. That would only damage the reputation of all Chinese cinema. Some Chinese netizens were still quite rational, not blindly attacking for the sake of it. Director Feng is sometimes insightful, sometimes confused. Not long ago, when he criticized those Running Man variety movies, he earned a flood of likes and praise. Now, after belittling Star Wars, The Force Awakens, he's getting nothing but scolding. Everyone is free to judge a movie, Feng included, but it's like a bad student blaming the top student for studying too well. Some movie fans, however, were far less polite. Domestic directors have only themselves to blame. Now that Duke Rosenberg is raking in money, they can't stand it. But they should think about it. If all their box office totals were added together, could they even match the amount Duke Rosenberg alone has earned? Movies have never been about production quality alone determining success. The outstanding marketing and publicity of Star Wars: The Force Awakens were undeniably key to its current box office frenzy. From a certain perspective, Feng Dapao's remarks actually helped Star Wars: The Force Awakens gain more attention. After achieving a record-breaking 1 billion renminbi in just 3 days, during the following 10 days, Star Wars: The Force Awakens still faced no competition in the Chinese cinema market, completely dominating the box office. Of course, Star Wars: The Force Awakens could not maintain that extraordinary 3-day pace of 1 billion renminbi indefinitely. That was impossible. After the first 3 days of screening, the initial heat inevitably dropped somewhat. But even so, it still earned a full 1 billion renminbi within those 10 days. In just 13 days of release, Star Wars: The Force Awakens soared past 2 billion renminbi in box office revenue, unquestionably surpassing Duke's other film, The Avengers, which had grossed 1.997 billion renminbi, becoming the highest-grossing film in Chinese cinematic history. Likewise, the Chinese market became The Force Awakens' highest-grossing region outside of North America. The title of the world's second-largest box office market was, without a doubt, well-deserved. Although Star Wars: The Force Awakens was a global sensation, with both its box office and merchandise sales skyrocketing, Duke's mood wasn't particularly good. In this city famous for its springs, after only half a day of sightseeing, Scarlett Johansson's throat began to feel sore, and her coughing grew increasingly worse. Though the doctor said it wasn't serious, Duke decided to end this not-so-pleasant trip. "I want to go back to Los Angeles." The perpetually hazy sky dampened Scarlett's spirits. "I miss Malibu and our Duke Manor." By now, Star Wars: The Force Awakens had been released in China for nearly half a month, earning more than 2 billion RMB, exceeding both his and Lucasfilm's expectations. With most of the promotional work completed, staying any longer served little purpose. "All right, darling." Duke gently tapped her forehead. "Let's go home." The past was, after all, the past. Duke was never one to dwell on what was gone. He had made peace with such matters decades ago. Chapter 941. The King of Commercial Films. Chapter 941. Chapter 941. The King of Commercial Films. While Star Wars: The Force Awakens was experiencing a meteoric rise at the Chinese box office, its performance in North America began to slow down. Especially after crossing the $1 billion mark, becoming the first film in North American history to surpass $1 billion. Both audience numbers and attendance rates steadily declined. After 6 weeks of screening in North American theaters, Star Wars: The Force Awakens had accumulated a domestic gross of $1.08427 billion. Without a doubt, this film had already secured the top spot as the highest-grossing film in North American history. Thanks to the explosive success of the Chinese market, the film's overseas box office also surged past $1.5 billion, bringing its global total to nearly $2.6 billion. The first $20 billion director in history is officially born. The whole world now bows before Duke Rosenberg. Almost simultaneously, the Los Angeles Times ran this headline on its front page. The media across America, and indeed the entire world, turned their spotlight toward Duke. Since the birth of cinema, no one had ever achieved such a feat. James Cameron couldn't do it. George Lucas couldn't do it. Steven Spielberg couldn't do it. Stanley Kubrick certainly couldn't. Perhaps in some people's eyes, Duke's films had nothing to do with art, but no one could deny that he was the leading force of global pop culture. A month after the historic emergence of the first $20 billion director, Star Wars: The Force Awakens earned another $300 million from North America and overseas markets combined, pushing its worldwide box office past $2.9 billion. The New York Times, Time Magazine, the Los Angeles Times, and the Washington Post all released special editions to commemorate this milestone. Duke Rosenberg now holds the personal total box office record, the North American single-film box office record, and the global single-film box office record. He stands at the very pinnacle of commercial cinema. Gathering countless records into one, Duke Rosenberg has created brilliance akin to a miracle. Looking across the entire world and throughout film history, there has never been another director as great as Duke Rosenberg. The undisputed king of global commercial films, Duke Rosenberg. Nearly every major North American media outlet showered Duke Rosenberg's name with the most extravagant praise imaginable, and countless facts from the past proved that Duke truly deserved such acclaim. As the American press said, calling Duke the king of commercial films today would draw little opposition. As for those voices claiming his works lacked artistic value, Duke himself simply didn't care. He had never aimed to make art films. Art had never been the determining factor of success for Hollywood cinema. Undeniably, box office revenue is not the standard for judging a film's quality. But in Hollywood, box office numbers represent so much more. Though Star Wars: The Force Awakens received only a few technical nominations, such as Best Visual Effects, at the latest Academy Awards, and none in major categories like Best Screenplay, Best Cinematography, Best Picture, or Best Director, its staggering box office figures had already ensured it would be the most influential film of 2014 and 2015, and unquestionably so. As the old year passed and the new one began, major media outlets conducted their annual retrospectives on Hollywood and its releases. Among the top 10 films of the year lists published by the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, the Washington Post, and magazines such as Rolling Stone, Empire, Entertainment Weekly, and Time, Star Wars: The Force Awakens unsurprisingly ranked number 1 across the board. Media outlets often have their biases, but in Instant Share's annual Best Movie poll, where 18.76 million users voted, a total of 14.38 million chose Star Wars: The Force Awakens, a figure that clearly demonstrated the film's immense popularity among ordinary audiences. Compared to the Oscar statuette, which no longer held any real appeal for him, Duke valued these public reactions far more. After all, professional critics, no matter how favorable their reviews, wouldn't spend an extra dollar on tickets or merchandise, whereas ordinary viewers were the ones truly willing to pay to support his films. According to incomplete statistics, at Duke's desk in the Warner Brothers studio, Tina Fey sat across from him, flipping through a report as she spoke. As of last weekend, Star Wars: The Force Awakens' North American box office is nearing $1.1 billion, and its overseas gross is approaching $1.9 billion. This coming weekend, it should officially become the first film in cinematic history to surpass $3 billion worldwide. Duke's gaze was fixed on the window. The sunlight outside was dazzling, almost scorching. The upcoming Academy Awards ceremony was just days away, and though he had received an invitation, he had absolutely no interest in attending. What occupied his mind instead was how to further expand the potential of the Star Wars franchise and the Marvel series, which was set to conclude its second phase in May. Indeed, given his wealth and stature, Duke could easily choose early retirement and live out his days in comfort. But anyone who knew him even slightly understood that was absolutely not Duke's style. In Duke's view, life was like rowing against the current. If you don't move forward, you drift backward. Besides, he was only in his 40s, far from retirement age. Retracting his gaze, Duke slowly swiveled his chair and looked back at Tina Fey. "And the merchandise?" he asked. "Any latest figures?" "The merchandise sales are also starting to slow down." Tina's words didn't surprise Duke. It was already late March. The Force Awakens' North American daily box office had dropped below $1 million. Though merchandise sales hadn't declined as sharply as ticket sales since early March, after peaking from November onward, they had inevitably begun tapering off. Of course, even if Star Wars: The Force Awakens merchandise stopped selling altogether starting today, the total sales so far had already reached an astonishing number. Up until last weekend, Tina Fey's voice never stopped. The merchandise and licensing of Star Wars: The Force Awakens have earned approximately $2.3 billion in North America alone, and the combined overseas merchandise and licensing income is also close to $2 billion. Although part of these merchandise and licensing revenues also included products from the original Star Wars trilogy and the prequel trilogy, the pulling power of The Force Awakens was beyond question. Duke's mood was clearly good. He lightly tapped his fingers on the table. "How are the negotiations with the actors going?" "Overall, fairly smooth." Tina Fey thought for a moment before saying, "Charles has already settled Daniel Wu's salary, and we've basically reached a consensus with Daisy Ridley as well." Compared with the former Walt Disney schedule, Duke's newly licensed Star Wars trilogy would be released at the pace of one film every 3 years. Although The Force Awakens was still far from leaving theaters, preparation for the next installment had already been placed on Lucasfilm's agenda. The first issue to resolve was the salary negotiations of the new trio, Daisy Ridley, Daniel Wu, and Oscar Isaac. In The Force Awakens cast, Harrison Ford's pay alone had been dozens of times that of the 3 new actors combined. After Duke had decisively killed off his character, such a situation would no longer occur. Moreover, having gone through The Force Awakens, Daisy Ridley, Daniel Wu, and Oscar Isaac were no longer unknown newcomers. Especially Daisy Ridley and Daniel Wu, describing them as superstars was by no means an exaggeration. Compared to their previous salaries of less than $500,000 USD, both Daisy Ridley and Daniel Wu's new contracts had increased their pay 6-fold, which was unavoidable. After all, filmmaking was, in the end, a business collaboration. And, Tina Fey said again at this time, Harrison Ford seems to have some complaints about you in Lucasfilm. Duke waved his hand indifferently. Don't bother with him. In The Force Awakens, Duke had killed off Han Solo largely due to salary issues, which had already left Harrison Ford somewhat displeased with him. Moreover, Lucasfilm's cooperation with Ford extended beyond the Star Wars series. It also included the Indiana Jones franchise. After the Star Wars reboot achieved massive success, the Indiana Jones series was naturally put back on Lucasfilm's schedule. The core figure of that series was undoubtedly Dr. Indiana Jones himself, and Harrison Ford was practically the living embodiment of that character. By the same logic, Harrison Ford would, of course, seize the opportunity to ask for an astronomical salary, which was his right. However, the Indiana Jones series becoming younger was an inevitable trend that aligned with the demands of the market. Therefore, Duke and Lucasfilm had no intention of reusing Harrison Ford, and that wasn't a big deal. The new Indiana Jones films could completely focus on telling the adventures of a young Dr. Indiana Jones. Duke personally finalized the actor to play the new Indiana Jones, Chris Pratt. As for what Harrison Ford thought or said, neither Duke nor Lucasfilm cared in the slightest. One after another, the latest directives passed through Tina Fey's hands and were delivered to various sectors of Duke Industries. Especially in the film division, series such as Marvel, Star Wars, and Indiana Jones would continue their respective money-making journeys. Finally, as Tina Fey stood up to leave, she suddenly remembered something. She opened her handbag and placed a beautifully packaged Tiffany gift box on the desk. Almost forgot, this was just delivered from Tiffany's. Duke picked it up and looked at it. The ring is ready. Chapter 942, I do. Chapter 942, Chapter 942, I do. The sea breeze blew from behind. A little girl with golden curly hair lay on the sightseeing platform at the stern of the ferry. One small hand propped up her pointed chin as she stared fixedly at Alcatraz Island growing farther and farther away behind her. On that island remained the most beautiful memory she had ever had. She had acted in a movie. Although it was only a tiny role with a single line, and the director was an unknown newcomer, she was still extremely happy, feeling that all her dreams of late had become real in that moment. The little girl lowered her head, unable to hide the smile curling at the corners of her lips. In the master bedroom of the Duke Manor's villa, sea breeze drifted in through the half-open window, scattering the long golden hair of the sleeping Scarlett Johansson. Her face, turned away from the window, carried a childlike, blissful smile. The ferry moved steadily across San Francisco Bay. Behind it, Alcatraz Island gradually sank into the glow of the setting sun, while the Golden Gate Bridge beside the ship was shrouded once again in thick fog. The little girl was still replaying in her mind that strange, yet wonderful experience of filming a movie. Footsteps with a peculiar rhythm sounded behind her. The little girl turned and saw a young man walking across the deck toward her. He looked about 20-something, slender but strikingly upright. His black eyes seemed deeper than the sea beneath the ship, gleaming with a light she couldn't describe, as if they could see through everything in the world. He was the director of the film they had just finished shooting, a person both unfamiliar and somehow intimately familiar to her. It was as if he were the closest person to her, closer even than the mother who had accompanied her to Alcatraz. Hello. When he also stepped onto the viewing platform, the little girl turned her head and flashed a big smile. "Mr. Director." The young director nodded slightly. "Hello." Seeing that familiar smile, the little girl scratched her head hard. She couldn't help feeling that their relationship was more than that of an actress and her director. There was something else tying them together. Yet no matter how hard she tried, she just couldn't remember what it was. The young director spoke little, seeming a bit cold, merely gazing thoughtfully toward the Golden Gate Bridge. Who was he, really? The little girl tried desperately to recall, almost pulling out her golden curls. What exactly is the connection between us? Duke. A woman with long brown hair walked briskly over at that moment, placing a folder in front of the young director. Her voice carried a faint nasal tone as she said, "You promised to let me copy the film. I need your signature here." Duke? Duke Rosenberg? The little girl was startled. Everything related to that name suddenly flooded her mind. The man standing beside her. He was the world's greatest director in her heart, the strongest and most decisive man she knew. And most importantly, he was her boyfriend. But why was he so tall while she was so small? Thinking of this, the little girl scratched her head again, but she remembered clearly what her godmother had once told her. If you want to obtain something, you must set your goal and pursue it with unwavering determination. After the brown-haired woman with the nasal voice left, the little girl turned around and walked straight to the young director's side. Following the etiquette her godmother had taught her, she extended one small hand and said, "I'm Scarlett Johansson, your girlfriend." "Of course you are my girlfriend." A tender smile appeared on the man's otherwise cold face. "Miss Scarlett Johansson." As he spoke, he reached into his pocket, took out something, and slipped it onto her left middle finger. The little girl stared in slight amazement, wanting to see clearly what he was putting on her finger, but she couldn't. Somehow, that single foot of distance felt farther than the whole Pacific Ocean. Why couldn't she see it? Why couldn't she see what it was? The little girl screamed silently in her heart. No matter how hard she shouted inside, even as tears welled up in her eyes from frustration, she still couldn't see what was on her finger. She kept trying to look, eyes widening more and more. Her long golden lashes fluttered twice, and Scarlett Johansson suddenly opened her eyes. Her beautiful pupils were filled with confusion, as if she had not yet fully awakened. Though still half-dazed, the first thing she did was raise her left hand and hold her middle finger before her eyes. Those beautiful eyes opened as wide as they could. The vacant gaze gradually focused, and when she saw that her left middle finger was bare, Scarlett Johansson shook her head hard. After she cleared her mind a bit more and looked again, there was still nothing there. She suddenly laughed, realizing it had only been a dream. Sighing softly, Scarlett glanced beside her. Duke was no longer there. She reached out to feel the spot and could tell from the warmth that he had left some time ago. Thinking of Duke, Scarlett shook her head again, understanding that everything just now had only been a dream. Checking the time on the wall clock, she slipped on a bathrobe and walked into the bathroom. Duke had recently been busy with the early preparations for several film series and had been working nonstop. It wasn't unusual for him to get up early to deal with business. Among all the directors she had ever met, Duke wasn't necessarily the most gifted, but he was definitely the hardest working. Only someone close to him like her could truly see how much effort Duke had put in to achieve his current success and status. After washing up and changing into comfortable home clothes, Scarlett Johansson stepped out of the bedroom. She walked along the long corridor, toward the staircase. Perhaps thinking again of the dream she just had, her pace down the stairs was a little slow. She certainly knew what the unseen object in her dream was. But she also knew she was already very happy now, and she knew Duke well enough to understand that, unless something happened to her, the chance of them separating was extremely small. It was just that. When she reached the first floor, Scarlett Johansson let out a long sigh, a faint trace of regret surfacing in her heart. Just like Duke's perseverance was a part of his nature, Scarlett Johansson had never regretted anything she said or did. Even if her words once created a rift between her and Duke when they were young, she had not regretted it, only gained a clearer understanding of what she truly wanted. But now, Scarlett Johansson regretted one thing she had once said. Monogamy goes against human nature. How could I have said something like that? Walking toward the dining room, Scarlett muttered softly to herself. Could it be that those words made Duke ignore some things? I really was such an airhead back then. When she arrived at the entrance of the dining room, She grumbled in her heart. Scarlett Johansson, you're even dumber than a cow. Hey, sweetheart. That unmistakably familiar voice rang out. Scarlett immediately stopped her self-talk, her ears naturally catching Duke's next words. You seem a bit distracted? I was thinking. Scarlett paused slightly, walked over to the table opposite Duke, pulled out a chair, and sat down. After giving a small smile, she continued. I was thinking if today's breakfast might have something special. Of course it does. Hearing Duke say that, Scarlett felt a little strange. The two of them had fixed meal plans and rarely ate anything special. Especially now that she was already 30 years old, she had to think about maintaining her figure and condition, and her diet was even more strict. Standing behind Duke, the housekeeper Emma clapped her hands lightly. The sound of high heels clicked against the floor. Although the person hadn't yet turned the corner from the passage between the kitchen and the dining room, just hearing those familiar footsteps, Scarlett Johansson could already tell that it was undoubtedly Tina Fey. Tina bringing her breakfast? Scarlett Johansson couldn't quite make sense of it. It was true that she and Tina Fey were good friends, but Scarlett also clearly knew Tina Fey's position in the Capital Group led by Duke. Saying that Tina was far more important than her wouldn't be an exaggeration, and Tina Fey had always only answered to Duke. She had no need whatsoever to please Scarlett. Tina Fey turned out from the passage, and Scarlett's gaze immediately fell on the tray in her hands. On it was a very delicate mousse cake, the exact type she had loved as a child. But as she grew older and had to think about her figure, she had gradually stayed away from such high-calorie desserts. There seemed to be something else on top of the cake, but it was a little too far away for Scarlett to see clearly. Instead, she turned her head and looked at Duke. Scarlett knew very well this must be Duke's doing. Even her parents might not know she loved this kind of cake. The only people who truly did were her godmother and Duke. But why would Duke suddenly prepare a mousse cake for her? Before Scarlett Johansson could figure it out, Tina Fey had already walked over, set the tray and cake down on the oak dining table in front of her, and said with a meaningful smile, Scar, enjoy this happy moment. Startled, Scarlett Johansson glanced at Tina Fey, then lowered her eyes to the cake, and immediately noticed it wasn't just an ordinary mousse cake, because how could a normal mousse cake have something strange embedded in its center? What was that thing? It even seemed to be reflecting the dining room's lights. Hardly able to believe what she was seeing, Scarlett Johansson widened her eyes and looked again and again, until 5 seconds later she was sure her eyes weren't deceiving her, nor was this an illusion. Right at the center top of the mousse cake sat, unmistakably, a ring. A sparkling diamond ring. Scarlett Johansson's lips parted slightly, her eyes full of surprise as she looked toward Duke across the table, as if completely unable to comprehend what he meant by this. Duke looked seriously at Scarlett. Perhaps there were many rumors and criticisms about her, but he didn't care at all. In fact, the outside world's criticisms of him were far greater than of Scarlett. If one really cared about all those voices, life in this world wouldn't be worth living happily. My dear, would you be willing to walk beside me from now on? Hearing Duke's words, Scarlett didn't even stop to think. She immediately, instinctively said, I do. Chapter 943, The Man Who Creates Miracles. Chapter 943. Chapter 943, The Man Who Creates Miracles. Duke, is there something you forgot to tell me? Inside the CBS television studio in Burbank, Nancy Josephson stood at the door of the lounge, looking at the ring on Duke's hand, deliberately speaking in a teasing tone. As an extremely shrewd agent, she knew exactly how to get along with Duke now. Having served Duke for over 20 years, their relationship had long surpassed that of an ordinary director and agent. Sitting in a high-backed chair, flipping through the interview strategy prepared by Penny Callis, Duke raised his head, glanced at Nancy Josephson, smiled, and said, I remember asking Tina to inform you. Not being able to witness you proposing to Scarlett with my own eyes. Nancy Josephson patted the back of the chair in front of her. That's truly a regret. If I had known earlier, I wouldn't have gone to Europe on that business trip. She then asked, Aren't you two planning to hold an official engagement ceremony? Duke shook his head. Scarlett and I don't have such plans. We'll save the ceremony for the wedding. A gentle knock on the door interrupted their conversation. Ellen DeGeneres' assistant came in to inform them that the show was about to start. Handing the materials in his hand to Nancy Josephson, Duke followed the assistant through a long corridor, arriving backstage, standing in the camera's blind spot, faintly able to see the busy figures ahead. This episode of The Ellen Show differed from past recordings and broadcasts. It wasn't easy to invite a superstar guest like Duke. To boost ratings and add excitement, the show had decided to air live this time. Opposite the stage was the audience seating. This time, many temporary seats had been added. About 500 audience members filled the studio. Unlike most talk shows that used crew members as stand-ins, all of these were Duke's real fans specially invited by the production team. In terms of commercial success, across the global film industry, Duke was unquestionably #1 on multiple charts: total box office, North American box office, and single film box office rankings. Some people might curl their lips and say he's just a commercial director, perhaps only a bit better than Michael Bay. But 2 Academy Awards for Best Director had long since silenced those people. At the other camera's blind spot on the side of the stage, the show's director called for action. A wave of enthusiastic applause erupted from the audience. As host Ellen DeGeneres walked onto the stage, standing before a massive background screen. On the screen behind her was a striking photo of Duke at work, along with a bold headline: "The man who seeks and creates miracles." Ellen DeGeneres crossed her hands in front of her and said, "As Duke Rosenberg continues to craft a new cinematic era with stunning visual effects and brilliant editing, he still focuses on the key to a movie's success: masterful storytelling." It was not yet time for Duke to come on stage. Ellen DeGeneres walked to her seat, looked up at the giant screen behind her, and continued. Over the past quarter-century, with a nearly 1 film per year pace, Duke Rosenberg has proven just how far a director can go, showing that the quality and quantity of his films are both astonishing. The big screen began playing clips from Duke's directed films. As the montage rolled, Ellen DeGeneres continued, "No other director has contributed more to modern film technology than Duke. He is audience's favorite director, rational yet not aloof. Duke is a dreamer, one who loves to push the boundaries of cinematic imagination, vividly illustrating his boundless creative desires while changing the way we experience movies. Through his work and each remarkable film, he continues to prove his lifelong devotion to cinema." At this point, Ellen DeGeneres made an inviting gesture. "Please welcome the first director in history to step into the $20 billion club, Duke Rosenberg." After checking his appearance one last time, Duke strode onto the stage, first waving to the audience, then walking over to Ellen DeGeneres, who greeted him with a big hug. Although she was one of the most famous homosexuals in Hollywood and privately rumored to have dated the most Hollywood actresses, Duke didn't mind at all. After sharing a brief embrace, he sat down on the sofa opposite her. "Welcome, Duke." Unlike usual interviews, Ellen DeGeneres clearly knew the man sitting opposite her was not an ordinary Hollywood director. "Congratulations on entering the top 3 of Forbes' Global Billionaires list." Duke nodded slightly. "Thank you." The two had already talked plenty beforehand, so they didn't linger on that topic and instead shifted toward the film industry. Star Wars: The Force Awakens created a miraculous $3 billion box office record. The conversation gradually returned to movies. Ellen DeGeneres smiled lightly as she asked, "But unlike your other films, this one used more traditional special effects. Does that mean traditional effects are making a comeback, or that digital technology's future isn't as bright as expected?" Indeed, Star Wars: The Force Awakens used a lot of traditional on-set effects, Duke reminded her, but the digital effects used were no fewer than the practical ones. In fact, without digital effects, those practical effects could never have achieved the results presented on the big screen. As soon as he finished speaking, Ellen DeGeneres countered sharply. "Not long ago, Steven Spielberg talked about special effects at a press conference. He said he believes in the magic of the practical, not the magic of the digital. What's your take on that?" Steven is a true master of cinema, a teacher we all look up to. He constantly reinvents himself, and that's why we can keep learning from him. Having reached his current position, a little humility didn't hurt. Duke shifted his tone and said, "But I do have a different view from him in some areas. He still uses KM editing, that editing machine that looks like a stubborn mule. It's clearly his comfort zone, a place that reflects how he connects his material." Duke shrugged slightly. "But for me, filmmaking technology is evolving. I want to be at the crest of the wave. I want to lead it, not let it wash over me. I don't want to stand by watching others ride that wave toward the shore. I thoroughly enjoy the process. On the other hand, the best balance between technical production and artistic intent is to make sure technology doesn't intrude upon or interfere with the storytelling, the core and soul of cinema. I'll admit, I didn't handle that balance well in Speed and The Rock, but I did in The Dark Knight and The Avengers. Ellen DeGeneres' next question jumped topics abruptly, as if trying to break his rhythm. Can you tell us which was the first film that truly influenced you? Sorry, I don't remember. Of course, Duke. Wasn't some rookie. Back when I was still in elementary school, I was already imagining stories from my own perspective. At that time, I was a simple kid with a deep longing for the fantasy tales found in movies, books, or anywhere else. Later, in Mountain High School, I spent an hour commuting every day, so naturally, I read on the way, usually short science fiction stories. So when did you decide you wanted to be a director? Ellen DeGeneres asked quickly. When I was studying at CalArts, I started doing basic work on Hollywood sets, like being a temp worker in the set design department. With a faint look of reminiscence on his face, Duke seemed to recall the late 1980s scenes. I saw some directors messing up one scene after another. They didn't know where to place the camera or how to light the shot. At that moment, I thought, if that's what it takes to be a director, I can do it too. Laughter rose from the audience. When it subsided, Duke continued. In my mind, I hadn't realized I could actually do it, not until I saw how badly some people did. Looking back, that was a bit arrogant. Of course, one day you'll face the moment when you truly are that person directing the camera, setting up the shots, and everything else. Those moments can be deeply intimidating. Duke's early directing career hadn't been smooth. His first film's production was full of challenges. When you have no experience, it all catches up with you. You have to build your strength. By the time I directed Speed, I had enough confidence and experience. Fortunately, with a relatively low budget and a short shooting schedule, I didn't do too badly. Success doesn't come easy. We all know that, Ellen DeGeneres said as Duke nodded. Then she asked the next question. The fast-paced rhythm of Speed, that distinctive Rosenberg tempo carried into The Rock and your later works. This pace makes audiences feel like they're racing through the wild. How did you develop that style? But Duke shook his head. There's no such thing as a Rosenberg style. I'm not even sure there is one. I'm always trying to carve out new paths. Like a skier who only loves fresh snow, I'm always searching for newly fallen snow. In Speed, I didn't have any particular style. I had a lot of ideas. I wasn't influenced by film school, nor by John Ford or the cinematic aesthetics of that era. Chapter 944. Is this self-praise? Chapter 944. Chapter 944. Is this self-praise? Just as he leaned more toward digital technology, Duke had never been a conservative person. He didn't cling to the old Hollywood, nor did he show much interest in the so-called golden age he had never personally experienced. His eyes were always fixed ahead. Compared to the past that had already become history, Duke was far more influenced by the rapidly developing film technology of the present, a mindset that could be considered somewhat anti-Martin Scorsese. Yes, my style and philosophy are completely different from Martin Scorsese's, Duke said frankly when Ellen DeGeneres brought it up. Martin always tries to emulate the aesthetic traits of European filmmakers, but I don't. I simply love movies. I mix all these aesthetic concepts together, and to me, the result shouldn't be forced into any particular style. I remember deliberately training myself to use long focus lenses in Saving Private Ryan, pulling the camera back to include more in the frame, just because everyone else was doing it. But that's not what makes me different. In The Matrix, I completely abandoned that approach and never did it again, because that's not how I see things. Duke had never hidden his views on cinema, and Ellen DeGeneres knew this well. She understood that the great director sitting before her never catered to anyone's expectations. If he catered to anything, it was undoubtedly to the world's broadest audience base. Perhaps that was the key to his success? The thought flashed through Ellen DeGeneres' mind, but as a skilled host, she didn't let it affect the show's rhythm. She asked, if you don't believe you have a particular style, then how do you see it? I think it's all about storytelling, Duke replied. What does the scene need? How do I plan to tell the audience? How does one character drive another? What is a character thinking but not saying? Is this moment dangerous? Is it uplifting? I force myself to think outside my comfort zone, shifting slightly to a more comfortable posture. Duke continued. Take special effects films, for example. Many people think they're easy to make, that it's all just motion capture or CGI. But large-scale effects are extremely complex. They're costly, demanding, and require filmmakers to quickly and effectively evoke a kind of transcendental state that connects the audience entirely with the characters. Honestly, when I see truly great special effects films, I'm always filled with admiration, because I think it's the hardest thing to achieve. Was this self-praise? The thought flashed through Ellen DeGeneres' mind, but she didn't voice it. The man across from her had earned the right to say such things. After all, weren't his own films, built upon advanced special effects, what had conquered the world? If you took away the visual effects and slowed down the breathless pacing, even an outsider like Ellen DeGeneres knew those films would fall among Hollywood's countless flops rather than become synonymous with classics. Gathering herself, Ellen asked the next question. When you've mastered the use of special effects, how do you handle your relationship with actors? In truth, managing interpersonal relationships within any Hollywood crew was always troublesome. No film set ever completed production in perfect harmony, nor did any cast and crew become a close-knit family after the shoot ended. Anyone with a bit of social experience understood this. But Duke wouldn't say that. Hollywood always presented its sunny side to the public. When I was in Mountain High School, Duke began, I worked part-time at a theater during the holidays, but I never trained in how to deal with actors. I had zero experience in that regard. He paused briefly, resting his chin lightly on one hand atop the sofa armrest. I think my way of connecting with them is through writing. I create these characters, and the actors have to fully embody them. That gives us plenty to communicate about. It's that simple. Ellen DeGeneres nodded. Communication is important. I think everyone understands that. When you have plenty to talk about with someone, you can find a kind of bond and form a working relationship, Duke said. I found that this makes it much easier to work with actors. They can collaborate with me effortlessly. Sometimes actors can't grasp everything in their heads. They can only capture a single, genuine moment. His words jumped topics slightly. These days, I've realized high-definition cameras are great, because you don't have to cut, unless it's a Steadicam shot, which I'm not good at. But I can control everything else, cranes, dollies, handheld cameras. So usually, I'll just start again right away. He mimicked his behavior on set. Hey, give me one more take, quick. Push this way or that way, or like this. Some actors can really respond because they can seize that moment. It's not cut. And then post-production staff stepping in, everything being scrapped, and people chatting around, breaking the flow. With HD cameras, they can stay in that moment. It's like in American football. You hear the coach in your ears saying, you're still there, you're still in the game, there's no need to stop, no one's blown the whistle. Those last few sentences came out a bit scattered. Ellen DeGeneres paused for a moment before she understood what he meant. Duke's words had thrown off her rhythm slightly, so she took a moment to regain it before asking a more routine question. In your films, there are both standout solo performances and brilliant ensemble scenes. Is there a difference in how you shoot them? Take Independence Day, for example, Duke replied. Every scene is an ensemble, so I have to bring my actors together and start thinking about how to direct a team. Such a question posed no difficulty for Duke. How do you position them correctly? When an actor isn't part of the creative process at that moment, how do you keep them from feeling neglected? Not every performer in a multi-character scene gets equal screen time. So, yes, that's a big challenge for a film like this. Though compared to the purely technical and logical problems, it comes after those. After a brief adjustment, Ellen DeGeneres found her rhythm again and asked one of the questions most people wanted to know. It's well known that your films always showcase the most advanced special effects in the industry. How do you make sure these effects don't overwhelm the story? Compared with her previous questions, this one was a bit more challenging. If, back in the 1990s, large-scale productions like Independence Day could drive box office success purely through their impressive visual effects, then in today's era of visual saturation, having advanced effects alone is far from enough. Take Guillermo del Toro's Pacific Rim, for example. It reached the very peak of Hollywood standards in terms of visual effects, yet its commercial performance was painfully disappointing. As Duke had said before, a hugely successful film never relies on just one strength. It's always the result of many elements working together. You have to make choices, Duke said. You want to take people somewhere beyond their imagination, but it must be built upon a foundation you've already established. It's not about those damn moments, but about the details surrounding those moments. What creates those details? After a few seconds of thought, he added, "Now, if you really think about it, many stories are absurd, or at least highly unrealistic. But when you build them brick by brick, layer by layer, you keep building and building until you create the details. The actors carry a heavy burden because they truly believe in your ideas, and that belief is what convinces the audience that what they're seeing is real." Because of the limited airtime, Ellen DeGeneres quickened her pace. Nowadays, actors often have to perform in front of green screens or blue screens, or react to imaginary objects added in post-production. What can you say to actors who lack experience in that kind of performance? Any actor can take a line of dialogue and, with another actor, create a good scene. From a director's perspective, there's actually nothing there. Everything you do is just making sure they're in the frame, right? After that rhetorical question, Duke shook his head slightly. But when the other actors aren't in the frame, that's when your real work begins. You use every trick and every bit of knowledge you have to create something that feels theatrically real in their minds. You tell them in detail what they're seeing and try to explain what it is. What I mean is, it's actually quite simple. You must understand that actors can create everything. Every time one of your films premieres, it's accompanied by an overwhelming media campaign, Ellen DeGeneres said, shifting toward her own field. What's your view on the power of the press? I've learned a lot about the media, Duke replied. They can be crazy. They can be like sharks driven mad by hunger. At that, Ellen DeGeneres laughed. Facing a director and producer of Duke's stature was no easy task. Digging up juicy revelations from someone like him was even harder. Besides, he was an extremely busy man. Getting him to appear on the show again would not be easy. Chapter 945, Infinite Possibilities. Chapter 945, Infinite Possibilities. The media is a double-edged sword, Duke understood that very well. However, he never deliberately avoided certain matters. By this point in his career, although his personality didn't allow reckless behavior, he didn't need to keep silent either. Moreover, some media outlets under the Walt Disney umbrella had never ceased slandering or attacking him over the years. There were also a few so-called professional film magazines that always spoke of him with disdain, as if the movies he made were synonymous with vulgarity. No matter how the media evaluates me, I've never been discouraged. Maybe occasionally, in some specific reviews or similar situations, but never before a movie's release, Duke said. Compared to earlier, his tone was full of confidence. Those who never think about what we're actually doing simply assume it's a campaign to discredit us. My team and I are portrayed as the dumbest people in film history, with every movie we make being treated like garbage. He shrugged, showing clear disdain. But tell me, why would a studio spend $200 million on a project? You know that's a massive budget. If we're not making mainstream commercial films, are we supposed to spend $200 million on an art house movie? I won't let anyone destroy my films. I'll do everything I can to make movies that both I and the mainstream audience love. Speaking of your films, Ellen DeGeneres' tone gradually sharpened. Which one is your personal favorite? All of them, Duke replied without hesitation. They're all projects my team and I poured our hearts into. Each one is like my own child. It's said that last month you participated in a private Hollywood discussion panel attended by David Fincher, Quentin Tarantino, James Cameron, Steven Spielberg, and Peter Jackson, among many other top directors, Ellen asked. Apparently, there was a huge disagreement during the meeting. Can you tell us why? That was just a normal industry discussion, Duke replied casually. Just like differing creative philosophies, we simply have different views on the future of cinema. In reality, the disagreements at that meeting were far more serious than Duke suggested. They might directly affect the future of the film industry and even bring revolutionary changes to the way the independent film sector operates. Since last year, major studios led by Warner Brothers, 20th Century Fox, and Universal Pictures had been searching for new profit models for the industry. They planned to launch a product that would allow audiences to watch newly released films directly from home, without setting foot in a theater. The idea was to stream new releases straight to users' homes through a special set-top box. Each film would cost $50, available for 48 hours, but viewable only once. Additionally, it would require a custom-made set-top box to ensure users couldn't record the movie, and they'd need to pay another $150 to purchase the device. Without question, if this plan succeeded, it would give Hollywood a new revenue stream after the decline of DVDs. The discussion Duke and the other major directors attended revolved precisely around this plan. However, the proposal met fierce opposition from the quintessential representatives of independent cinema, Quentin Tarantino and David Fincher, who both publicly denounced it. Meanwhile, Duke, James Cameron, Steven Spielberg, and Peter Jackson were among the strongest supporters. The reason for this divide was simple: pure financial interest. In the coming years, the average home setup could never rival the immersive experience of a theater. For directors like Duke, whose films were designed for the big screen, watching them at home and in cinemas were two entirely different experiences. Such a system wouldn't harm their box office. It might even attract people who rarely go to theaters, thereby increasing the industry's total revenue. For directors like David Fincher and Quentin Tarantino, however, whose works rely less on spectacle, the difference between home viewing and theater viewing was far smaller. This meant their films would face a direct box office hit. Indeed, their movies had never been known for massive box office numbers, earning more from later physical sales or streaming. But one shouldn't forget that box office revenue forms the foundation of a film's total income. If a movie doesn't perform well in theaters, how many people can one expect to buy or stream it later? Some claim that's certain. Movies flop at the box office but thrive in the video market, earning $80 million over 10 years. Yet they ignore another fact. Blockbusters like The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King, and Spider-Man made over $100 million in DVD sales in their first week in North America alone, not to mention additional home video revenue. David Fincher and Quentin Tarantino weren't fools. They knew this system would be a blessing for commercial directors and major studios, but a nightmare for independent filmmakers. Still, they were powerless to change anything. Hollywood was still dominated by the Big Six era, and directors like Duke, James Cameron, Steven Spielberg, and Peter Jackson had all become shareholders in those studios. Of course, Duke would continue to defend the irreplaceable position of theatrical screenings. At this stage, both creatively and economically, exclusive theatrical premieres remained essential. Ellen DeGeneres went on to ask several sharp questions, but after more than 20 years in Hollywood, Duke handled them with ease. As the program neared its end, their discussion turned to the film industry as a whole. Many directors have shared their personal top 10 favorite films. Ellen said, looking at Duke, "Could you tell us your own list, excluding the ones you've directed yourself?" "My top 10 favorite films." Duke repeated the question, his mind quickly turning. Then he not only listed the titles, but also explained his reasons. Star Wars. It created an unparalleled American legend and changed the way movies are distributed. Terminator 2. Judgment Day. Even now, it remains breathtaking. Jurassic Park. It marked the beginning of Hollywood's true domination of the global market. Forrest Gump. The undisputed best picture of the 1990s. Titanic. It not only ignited a wave of pop culture, but also completely opened the global market for Hollywood. 300, directed by Zack Snyder, pioneered an entirely new cinematic style. Avatar ushered the film industry into a new era. Toy Story 3 not only created the most glorious moment in animated film history, but also pulled the off-track Pixar studio back onto the right path. Captain America, The Winter Soldier. Even if it didn't dethrone superheroes from their pedestal, it still reached new cinematic heights. Clearly, given Duke's personality and preferences, not a single true, old film made his list, nor any so-called product of Hollywood's golden age that so many Academy members nostalgically revere. Was the so-called golden age of Hollywood truly more brilliant than the Hollywood of today? Anyone with clear eyes could easily arrive at the answer. Ellen DeGeneres' gaze fell upon Duke's left hand as she tentatively asked, "Is that an engagement ring?" Duke didn't deny it and gave a slight nod. "May I ask?" Ellen continued. Duke, are you engaged to Miss Scarlett Johansson? As always, Duke neither flaunted nor avoided such matters. It happened just a few days ago, he replied. Ellen seemed about to say something else, but Duke interrupted her with a small smile. You'll receive an invitation when the time comes. That would be such an honor, Ellen said, her face lighting up with delight. Finally, she asked, do you have any new plans for the next few years? Of course, Duke said confidently. Both the Star Wars series and the Marvel series are at crucial stages. I'll continue directing and producing more films in the future. The interview ended there. Duke politely declined Ellen DeGeneres' invitation to her after-show party and left the TV studio directly. This episode could be seen as a summary of Duke's past, present, and future. He had expressed many of his genuine thoughts, especially about his production philosophy and creative direction in filmmaking. Meanwhile, Star Wars: The Force Awakens continued its theatrical run in both North America and overseas. After surpassing $1.1 billion at the North American box office, its screenings and attendance inevitably entered the decline that every blockbuster eventually faces. Overseas, although new regions had joined its release, none were major markets, and the global enthusiasm had cooled down. As of now, Star Wars: The Force Awakens had accumulated more than $3.1 billion worldwide, leaving behind a vast gulf for any potential challengers. Although his wedding preparations were underway, Duke had entrusted that work to a professional company. His main focus remained on the next stage of plans for Marvel Studios and Lucasfilm. Marvel had already entered Phase 3, with the internal war among the Avengers about to erupt. The second installment of the Star Wars sequel trilogy was in active pre-production, and the spin-off series would launch first. At the same time, Duke was developing a new science fiction project about the future. Amid his busy schedule, he had already begun writing. However, since his upcoming work calendar was fully booked for the next 2 years, the project would have to wait. Fortunately, it was an original concept entirely of his own creation, one that required time to refine the world building and polish the script. There were still infinite possibilities waiting for him ahead. Chapter 946, Epilogue. Chapter 946, Chapter 946, Epilogue. Time flies like an arrow. The years pass like flowing water. More than a decade has gone by in a flash, yet Hollywood remains the same glamorous Hollywood it has always been. Although the Chinese market has risen and replaced North America as the world's largest box office territory, and Chinese films, benefiting from their home advantage, have surged rapidly. On a global scale, Hollywood is still the center of world cinema. That position has never been shaken. As Duke once said, any nation or region that wishes to replace Hollywood cannot achieve it by relying solely on the films themselves. Even though the year has already passed 2030, this world is still dominated by Western culture. Just like Hollywood's position in the global film industry, the Academy Awards ceremony remains as dazzling and magnificent as ever. In front of the newly completed Rosenberg Theater on Hollywood Boulevard, thousands of journalists and tens of thousands of movie fans gathered, awaiting the start of the Oscars. Would Duke Rosenberg appear at this year's Academy Awards ceremony? That was the question every journalist cared about. If he were to be absent, the first Oscars held in the newly relocated theater would undoubtedly lose much of its brilliance. I don't think he'll come. Standing in the media photo area, a reporter in his 30s shook his head. Don't forget, Duke Rosenberg hasn't appeared at any Oscar ceremony since 2010. Rumor has it that his views differ greatly from those of many in the Academy. And really, does a director with a total box office of $50 billion need the Oscars to add to his prestige? Many around him nodded in agreement. Indeed, just as the reporter said, in the global commercial film world over the past half-century, it had almost entirely been Duke Rosenberg's one-man dominion. Whenever one of his films was released, countless movie fans flocked to theaters as if under a spell of frenzy, eagerly buying tickets and watching his work. After Star Wars: The Force Awakens made him the first director in history to surpass $20 billion in total box office, the 18 films he made over. The next 18 years raked in another $30 billion. He thus became the first director in human history to reach $50 billion in total box office revenue. Of course, this achievement was partly due to the rapid growth of the Chinese market. But even looking globally, During the same period, no one could rival Duke Rosenberg. For the film industry, he was practically a living bug in the system. Not to mention the total box office records. Back in 2019, Duke Rosenberg's Future War set a record for an original, non-adapted, non-sequel film by grossing over $2 billion worldwide, leaving people utterly stunned. It also silenced those who had mocked him for only being able to adapt comic books and shoot sequels. Would a director like that need the Oscars to enhance his aura? If anything, it was the Oscars that needed him to boost their prestige and appeal. Think about it. Duke Rosenberg had been absent from the Oscars for more than 20 consecutive years. How did that make the ceremony look? Was it that the Oscars weren't attractive enough? Or that the Academy's proclaimed fairness and justice were nothing but a fad? It was a blow that left the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences rather embarrassed. Duke Rosenberg indeed doesn't need the Oscar halo. An older reporter suddenly spoke up. But he will definitely walk the Oscar red carpet this year. Think about it. How much the Academy has already compromised to please him. Many nodded. Again, over the past decade, not only had the Academy insisted on inviting Duke Rosenberg every year, but as a gesture of gratitude for his contribution to Hollywood cinema, they had even named the brand new Oscar theater the Rosenberg Theater. It was clear to everyone that the Academy was trying to flatter Duke Rosenberg. I'm certain Duke Rosenberg will appear at this year's Oscars. This came from a local Los Angeles journalist, his tone resolute. Have you forgotten? Sofia Coppola is very likely to win the Oscar for Best Director, and her film is also the frontrunner for Best Picture. Everyone knew about the decades-long friendship between Sofia Coppola and Duke Rosenberg. But the reporter's firm certainty also stemmed from another fact. The title of Sofia Coppola's Oscar favorite film was Duke Rosenberg. That's right. It was a biographical film about Duke Rosenberg himself, and the only one officially authorized and approved by him. Given Duke Rosenberg's personality, it was almost certain that he would attend in person to support Sofia Coppola. The reporter then added with a reminder, and don't forget, our princess, Anna Rosenberg, has also received an Oscar nomination for Best Short Film this year. At once, all eyes turned toward the entrance of the red carpet. Everyone knew Duke Rosenberg and Scarlett Johansson would definitely show up to cheer for their daughter. Just then, a brand new luxury electric car pulled up to the red carpet. When the door opened, a familiar figure stepped out first. His deep brown hair had turned quite gray, yet his posture remained straight and dignified. He turned back to help a blonde woman out of the car, her figure still as graceful as ever, and that woman's hand was holding another, smaller, fair hand. The reporters on site went wild, frantically snapping photos, as countless camera lenses focused in that direction. Even if that couple said nothing and didn't so much as glance at the crowd, they still stole the spotlight from everyone else. They were, without a doubt, the radiant center of attention at the Rosenberg Theater. Duke Rosenberg and his wife had arrived. The king of Hollywood's commercial cinema was in attendance. Not just the journalists. Fans lining both sides of the red carpet erupted into thunderous cheers upon seeing Duke, as if worshipping the god of their hearts, even though that god's eyes were fixed only on Scarlett Johansson and their daughter. A young girl stepped out of the car, led by Scarlett Johansson, and stood between her and Duke. "Sweetheart," Scarlett said calmly, noticing her daughter's hand gripping her arm tightly in excitement. "Relax and mind your manners," Duke added softly. "Haven't you gotten used to scenes like this by now?" As his daughter, from the moment she was born, she had been destined to live under the spotlight of countless gazes. It was both a blessing and a burden. But what pleased Duke most was that his daughter wasn't just intelligent. Under the guidance of him, Scarlett, and her late grandmother, she had also grown calm and composed. Anna Rosenberg smiled slightly, presenting her most graceful demeanor. She looped one arm through Duke's and the other through Scarlett's, whispering, "Don't worry about me." She wore a moon-white mermaid-style gown, her golden hair, just like her mother's, elegantly tied up, accentuating her delicate face and those ocean-deep, luminous eyes. Yet unlike Scarlett, Anna's physique had inherited Duke's traits, slender and tall, standing 5 feet 8 inches, her posture and expression radiating the same confidence and determination that Duke embodied. Though hailed by the media and the public as Hollywood's princess, Anna Rosenberg was keenly self-aware. She knew that her journey as a director had only just begun. Just as Duke had been his mother's pride, Anna was Duke's greatest pride, and he firmly believed that she would be the pride of his entire life. The year Anna was born, Duke's trusted assistant and close friend Anna Prinz had passed away in an accident. To honor her memory, Duke named his newborn daughter Anna. Born into such a family, having grown up surrounded by cinema from birth, it was only natural that Anna Rosenberg would one day follow her father's path and become a director herself. At present, she had already shown outstanding talent and worked hard enough. Her second short film, Early Summer, directed by herself, was nominated for the Academy Award for Best Short Film. Although it couldn't prove too much, it was still a kind of recognition and encouragement. Duke, look over here. Just like before, Duke held his daughter's arm and walked down the red carpet at a normal pace. When they reached the media section, the reporters almost went into a frenzy. Mrs. Johansson, could you smile for us? Miss Rosenberg, this way. Over here. Compared to Duke and Scarlett Johansson's calm composure, the young Anna was far more curious about this world. Having grown up under the spotlight since childhood, she wasn't afraid of the media at all. She turned her head and gave a gentle smile toward the press area. She's so beautiful. Many reporters sighed while taking pictures. Truly one of God's favorites. Even though she isn't a real princess, all the royal families in the world together couldn't find one as beautiful as her. Another reporter exaggeratedly said, Aphrodite has descended from Mount Olympus and come to Hollywood. After walking the long red carpet, neither Duke and Scarlett nor Anna Rosenberg had any interest in giving interviews. They went straight into the Rosenberg Theater and entered the VIP lounge for a brief rest. Hey, Duke, Scar, Anna. Just as they stepped into the lounge, a familiar voice called out, Over here. Duke turned his head. Leonardo DiCaprio was waving at them, and beside him stood Sofia Coppola, the hottest contender for Best Director at this year's Academy Awards. Leonardo had also aged, but he remained as elegant and charming as ever, with a long-legged blonde model standing beside him. As usual, the model wasn't very old, but after so many years, everyone, like him, had long grown used to Leonardo's style. By now, Leonardo was no longer the perpetual Oscar runner-up. Since winning his first Best Actor Oscar, he had gone on to win 2 more, now possessing 3 Best Actor statuettes in total. Hi, Leo. Hi, Sophia. After Duke greeted Leonardo and Sofia Coppola, Anna walked up beside Sophia, looped her arm through hers, and said, Godmother, you're definitely going to win. Then she turned toward Leonardo and said, What a pity, Godfather. Like my dad, you don't have a film competing this year. Leonardo laughed and said, How could I ever compare to your father? He doesn't need something like an Oscar statuette at all. Chapter 947, The End. Chapter 947, Chapter 947, The End. Coming to their seats in the Rosenberg Theater, Duke and his party hadn't had a moment of peace since sitting down. Countless people came over to greet them one after another. Among them were executives from Hollywood's 6 major studios, popular movie and music stars, social elites attending the ceremony, and even the owner of the largest cinema chain company across the Pacific. Oh God! Finally getting a moment to rest, Anna rubbed her face, stiff from smiling, and complained to Scarlett Johansson, Mom, can't they just let us have a little peace? Naturally, Duke heard that. He gently patted his daughter, who sat between them, and said, My dear, socializing is a basic skill you must master. As the sole heir to a massive fortune and a newcomer wanting to make a name for herself as a director, the importance of socializing went without saying. Anna Rosenberg was merely complaining privately to her mother. She turned to Duke with an apologetic smile and said, I know, Dad. Just like Duke in his younger years, being private was one thing, but facing the public was another. Anna had received plenty of training in this area since childhood. When another person came to greet them, the stiffness on her face instantly disappeared, replaced by a reserved yet graceful smile. This year's Academy Awards ceremony finally began. Although Duke's new film Avengers vs. Justice League had grossed nearly $4 billion worldwide, it was still not given much attention by the Academy aside from a few technical categories. Even though the old men who once controlled the Academy had mostly retired, the Oscars were still the same. Not only did they cling to their conservative judging style, but even the format and process of the ceremony remained unchanged. The older members retired, only to be replaced by a new group of elders. People inevitably became more conservative as they aged. That was simply the way of things. Though more than 20 years had passed, Duke still only had 2 Best Director Oscars. Yet no one could deny his achievements, not even the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. Otherwise, there would never have been a Rosenberg Theater. And the biggest favorite of this year's Oscars was Sofia Coppola's biographical film Duke Rosenberg. Leonardo DiCaprio walked onto the stage as the presenter for the Best Picture nominees. The Academy had clearly put a lot of thought into it. The film he was introducing was exactly Duke Rosenberg. Some people seem to be born with the gift of directing and an endless sense of curiosity. He has created countless unforgettable moments, yet still strives for perfection, constantly challenging himself. Standing at the center of the stage, Leonardo DiCaprio's tone was solemn and serious, as though he were introducing the most extraordinary person in the world. The Duke Rosenberg I know, just like the one in Sofia Coppola's film, has spent his entire life studying cinema. He can turn every flicker of light and shadow he's ever seen into something of his own, creating a unique style and telling beautiful, moving stories through his films. He turned his gaze toward where Duke and his family sat. In the past few decades of Hollywood, there have been many great directors, from Alfred Hitchcock to Martin Scorsese, from Steven Spielberg to James Cameron. They were all pioneers of their times, but none have ever achieved the same level of commercial success as Duke Rosenberg. $50 billion at the box office is the greatest proof of his legacy. Thunderous applause filled the hall. After it subsided slightly, Leonardo continued, "He is a great director, intelligent, witty, and sometimes even humble. Of course, he's also proud of his films, whether they are his early blockbusters or his later, thought-provoking works." Recently, he turned 60, Leonardo said with a faint smile, but you can still see the childlike spirit in him, perhaps even a kind of innocence. He's filled with passion for his next project and for his fellow filmmakers. Finally, Leonardo concluded, Duke Rosenberg, nominated for Best Picture, tells the story of this truly great director. Applause erupted once again. Anna Rosenberg clapped hard, her eyes filled with open admiration and fervor as she looked at her father. This was her father. His greatness needed no one's validation. She had witnessed it countless times since childhood. He was her best example, her goal, and the person she longed to surpass. With such a father, she couldn't help but feel immense pride, a man who could make adaptation films that drove both fans and non-fans wild, and who could create original works that swept across the world. Anna remembered clearly that over a decade ago, when her father focused on comic book adaptations and the Star Wars series, many media outlets that disliked him had clamored that he'd exhausted his talent, that he no longer had the ability to make original films and could only rely on adapting others' works to maintain his fame and box office. But her father paid no mind to outside opinions. He simply devoted himself to perfecting his scripts. That led to the Future War trilogy, an original science fiction series that swept across North America and the world, silencing every critic. She remembered her mother once saying that since her birth, her father had made 18 films, half adaptations and half originals. The $30 billion in box office revenue was also evenly split, which alone was proof of his versatility as a filmmaker. Though there were still those who claimed her father only knew how to make shallow sci-fi movies and couldn't create films with true depth, Anna couldn't care less. As she liked to say, using the Chinese she had learned over the years, those people were simply jealous and bitter. Thinking of this, Anna looked again at Duke. Duke turned his head and asked curiously, "What is it, dear?" "Nothing." Anna shook her head, then whispered, "Dad, I just think you're really great." Duke couldn't help but chuckle. "That doesn't sound like something you'd say. I always say I'll surpass you." Anna's tone carried a trace of frustration. "But everything you've achieved is just too overwhelming." Having such a father was, undeniably, a kind of pressure. But Anna wasn't the type to vent it carelessly. She understood that pressure was what created motivation. At that moment, the Oscar ceremony had reached its third-to-last award. The male presenter on stage announced, and the Best Actress tonight goes to Suri Cruz, Duke Rosenberg. How could she win? Scarlett frowned. Anna quickly shut her mouth and stole a glance at her father, only to see him pretending not to have heard her mother's words. Her mother was still whispering complaints, which Anna could understand. After all, Suri Cruise had played the legendary actress Charlize Theron in her godmother's film. Though her mother had some complaints, and she herself hadn't won the Best Short Film award earlier, it didn't affect Anna's mood, especially as she listened to Suri Cruise's acceptance speech on stage, in which she repeatedly said, "My godfather is the person who has influenced my life the most. My achievements today are all thanks to his guidance and inspiration." Anna slightly lifted her chin. If it weren't for having a director like her father as her godfather, could an actress like Suri Cruise, with only average talent and poor social skills, ever achieve what she had today? Just the title of Duke Rosenberg's goddaughter was enough to make everyone in Hollywood treat her with extra respect. In fact, Anna even felt that whether it was Suri Cruise or her godmother Sofia Coppola, the reason they had become Oscar favorites this year was all because they had starred in or directed the same film. Duke Rosenberg. The members of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences weren't fools. They knew exactly how terrifying her father's global influence was. In today's climate, where the Oscars faced criticism and its status was declining, having Duke's support was of critical importance to the Academy. Even an idiot would now know that her father had hundreds of millions of passionate fans around the world. The Duke fans could be found in every corner of the globe. Just as Anna expected, the ceremony went exactly as predicted. The aging George Lucas took the stage to present the Best Director award. The Oscar for Best Director goes to Sofia Coppola for Duke Rosenberg. If she hadn't directed her father's biographical film, how many more years would her godmother have had to wait before winning the Best Director statuette? Anna shook her head. She had seen all of her godmother's films, except for Lost in Translation, which was made right after leaving her father's side. All her later works showed a steady decline in quality. It was clear, without her father's help and influence, her godmother's directing skills had deteriorated. She looked once more at Duke. Just his name alone could influence the results of one of the world's most prestigious film awards. When would she ever be able to reach such a level? Suri Cruise's father, Tom Cruise, now stood on the stage. After introducing the other Best Picture nominees, he said, "There is one film that faithfully records a director's journey from a newcomer to a great master. I had the honor of witnessing this process firsthand. That film is Duke Rosenberg." He tore open the large, vintage-style envelope. The Oscar for Best Picture goes to Duke Rosenberg. Applause erupted once again. Suddenly, the entire audience rose to their feet. Everyone, including the cameras, ignored Sofia Coppola's production team completely and turned directly toward Duke's seat. The applause was thunderous, so loud it seemed as if the very air was filled with the echo of the name Duke Rosenberg. While clapping, Anna silently made up her mind. One day, she too would become as great as her father. The end.